Hey everybody, this is Sleepy Crime, and today I'm gonna help you. I know you want to fall asleep to this video, so before you do, put a like on the video and subscribe to the channel. By the way, where are you from and what time are you watching? Make yourself comfortable and relax. Tara Calico woke early on September 20th, 1988, in Belen, New Mexico, like many other mornings. At 19, she was a bright and active college student, attending the University of New Mexico Valencia campus. She lived with her mother and stepfather and had a routine that rarely changed. Tara was health-conscious, disciplined, and known for her daily 36-mile bike rides along New Mexico State Road 47. That Tuesday, she planned to stick to her schedule. She had a tennis date with her boyfriend at noon and a class later in the day. At around 9:30 a.m., she left the house with her mother's pink Huffy bike, a Sony Walkman playing a Boston cassette in her ears. She told her mother, Patty Dole, to come looking for her if she wasn't back by noon. Tara often rode without concern, despite her mother's warnings about the traffic and previous incidents on the route. Patty even offered to accompany her, but Tara declined, saying she'd be fine. Tara's route along NM 47 was a familiar one, flat and rural, lined by scrub and fencing, with little to break the landscape. On this day, she wore a white t-shirt with First National Bank of Belen written across it, green shorts with white piping, and white ankle socks with turquoise and white sneakers. Several people later reported seeing her riding northbound on the shoulder of the road. Most accounts placed her between 9:45 and 11 a.m. near mile markers 20 and 23. Witnesses also described seeing a light-colored pickup truck following her, possibly a 1953 Ford with a camper shell and a logo on the rear window. By early afternoon, Tara had not returned home. Patty grew concerned, recalling the specific request Tara had made that morning. She drove the same route her daughter always took, hoping to find her riding back, delayed by a flat tire or distraction. Instead, she found no sign of Tara, only a stretch of road, hot under the sun, with wind-moving dust across the shoulder. Local law enforcement was notified, and by late afternoon, the Valencia County Sheriff's Department joined in a search. Along the bike path, they found fragments of Tara's Walkman, broken cassette pieces, and a Boston tape discarded by the roadside. Further up, bicycle tracks appeared to swerve off the road, near what appeared to be fresh vehicle tire marks. There was no sign of struggle, but the location of the scattered items hinted at something sudden. Her pink Huffy bike was missing, as if it had vanished with her. In hours, what began as a typical day became a nightmare for Tara's family. The road she traveled every morning for health and peace became the focus of a growing mystery. That day, Tara Calico disappeared, and what followed would haunt her town, her family, and a nation for decades. When Tara Calico failed to return by noon, Patty Dole's concern turned to urgency. The ride was familiar and should not have taken more than 2 hours. By 12:30 p.m., she was on the road, retracing Tara's route south along NM 47. There was no sign of Tara or her bicycle. What she did find, scattered pieces of Tara's Sony Walkman and a damaged cassette tape, chilled her. These weren't the normal signs of a simple delay. They were abrupt, discarded clues that something had gone wrong. Patty contacted the Valencia County Sheriff's Department. Within hours, deputies were dispatched to investigate. They confirmed the discovery of broken audio equipment along the road. Around mile marker 20, tire skid marks were noted in the gravel near the shoulder, accompanied by what looked like bicycle tracks swerving off course. There was no blood, no clothing, and no physical remains, only signs that something had forced an abrupt stop to Tara's ride. The pink Huffy bike she'd borrowed from her mother was nowhere to be found. In the first 24 hours, deputies considered several scenarios. Perhaps Tara had been injured and was somewhere nearby, dazed or unconscious. Perhaps she had accepted a ride from someone she trusted. Yet those who knew her insisted she wasn't the type to leave her route or her commitments without warning. She had made clear plans for the day. Her personality, punctual, responsible, ruled out ideas of voluntary disappearance. Word spread quickly across the small community of Belen. Volunteers joined law enforcement in searching the surrounding arroyos, ravines, and brushland. Helicopters scanned from the air, and deputies canvassed homes near the highway. Despite the effort, there were no further signs of Tara or the pink bicycle. Flyers with her photo were posted at gas stations, community centers, and grocery stores. Her image, dark-haired, youthful, with steady eyes, became instantly recognizable in town. Witness reports began to surface. Several drivers remembered seeing Tara riding her bike that morning. A few recalled a light-colored pickup truck with a camper shell, driving slowly behind her or parked near her route. It was described as an older model Ford, faded and dusty, with a decal or custom image on the rear window. The truck had not been seen before in the area. Its presence on the quiet road raised concerns. Despite interviews and composite sketches, no truck was located and no suspects identified. Tara's family remained vocal. Patty and her husband, John Dole, organized community meetings and pressed law enforcement for updates. They believed from the start that Tara had been abducted. The presence of broken equipment and the sudden disappearance supported their theory. But in the absence of physical evidence, the case stalled. Days passed without progress. The sheriff's office issued bulletins and worked with state police, but leads were thin. Tara had vanished without trace. The stretch of highway she knew so well gave up no answers. The silence along NM 47 only deepened. As weeks went by, the story moved beyond New Mexico. National news outlets began covering Tara's disappearance. Her photo appeared on missing persons posters distributed across the Southwest. Family members gave interviews, and Tara's case was featured on programs dedicated to unsolved crimes. The more attention the story received, the more it raised difficult questions, and still offered no resolution. For Tara's family, every day that passed without news added to the weight of uncertainty. They kept searching. They left no call unanswered, but the desert held its secrets, and Tara Calico was gone. On June 15, 1989, a year after Tara Calico's disappearance, a photograph was found in the parking lot of a convenience store in Port St. Joe, Florida, over 1,200 miles from Belen, New Mexico. The image, a Polaroid, lay face up on the asphalt. A woman who spotted it turned it in to the local police. At first glance, it was a disturbing image. Two individuals, a young woman and a boy, lying side by side on what appeared to be a bed or carpeted surface, their mouths covered with black duct tape. Their hands were bound behind their backs. Behind them, visible was the interior of what looked like a van. Scattered around them were a few items, a book, a pillow, some fabric. Both stared directly at the camera. The woman who found the photo said a white Toyota cargo van had been parked in the spot shortly before. When she entered the store, the van was gone. Authorities released the image to the public, hoping for leads. The photo's clarity made it unusual. It didn't appear to be taken in secret. It was direct, posed, and unsettling. Analysis confirmed the photo had been taken recently, on film not available until May 1989. When news of the photo reached Tara Calico's family, they reacted with shock. Patty Dole examined it closely. She believed the girl in the photo resembled her daughter. The shape of the eyebrows, the jawline, a distinctive scar on the leg that matched one Tara had from a car accident. The book beside the girl in the image, a copy of My Sweet Adrena by V.C. Andrews, was one of Tara's favorites. The boy in the picture was later thought to resemble Michael Henley, a child who had gone missing from New Mexico in April 1988 while on a camping trip with his father in the Zuni Mountains. The FBI took the photo seriously. It was sent to Los Alamos National Laboratory for imaging analysis. Their conclusion was inconclusive. The quality of the photo made certainty difficult. Scotland Yard analysts reportedly believed the girl in the photo was Tara, but U.S. investigators did not confirm this with the same confidence. The possibility that Tara had been alive months after her disappearance stirred both hope and horror. If she had been taken and was still alive when the photograph was made, the urgency to find her grew exponentially. However, no trace of the van or the photographer was ever found. The parking lot yielded no useful forensic evidence. The identity of the woman who took the photo, or the man who left it, remained unknown. In 1990, the case took another turn. Michael Henley's remains were discovered in the Zuni Mountains, not far from where he had disappeared. Authorities concluded he had died of exposure. His family accepted this conclusion, removing him from the equation of the Polaroid. But the girl's identity remained unverified. If it wasn't Tara, no one else came forward to claim her identity. The photograph became a haunting artifact in Tara's case. It was published in newspapers and shown on television across the country. It sparked debate among viewers and professionals. Some were convinced it was Tara. Others argued the resemblance wasn't sufficient, but the timing, the details in the image, and the emotional reaction of her mother kept it central to the investigation. Despite extensive circulation of the image and multiple attempts to trace its origin, no further evidence emerged. The Polaroid was filed as a possible clue, unresolved and unexplained. It added a surreal dimension to the search for Tara Calico, suggesting captivity, movement across states, and the chilling possibility that she had lived for months after vanishing. To Tara's family, the photo was more than just a clue. It was a window into a fate they feared and a reminder that their daughter might still be waiting to be found. They kept the image, studied it, and never stopped asking questions. But the photo remained what it was from the start, an unanswered message from the shadows. After the discovery of the Polaroid in 1989, Tara Calico's case entered a new phase. The photograph intensified media interest, but it did not produce a breakthrough. Over the next several years, tips trickled in from across the country. Some claimed to have seen Tara in different states, Florida, California, and even Canada. Sightings were often vague, based on passing resemblance or overheard conversations. None led to her recovery. Law enforcement followed up on every credible lead. Investigators interviewed truck drivers, travelers, and residents who thought they recognized the girl in the photograph. Some calls reported a young woman in distress or being held against her will, often in remote locations. Despite nationwide circulation of her image and age-progressed renderings, no confirmed sighting of Tara was ever established. The Valencia County Sheriff's Department worked with the FBI and the New Mexico State Police, but the interagency efforts did not resolve the case. The lack of physical evidence, no body, no vehicle, no trace of the pink Huffy bike, left the investigation hamstrung. As years passed, leads slowed. Witness memories faded. Technology in the early 1990s had not yet reached the level of advanced forensic databases or digital surveillance. The Polaroid remained the strongest possible clue. More photos surfaced over time. In 2009, additional Polaroids were found in connection to the case, including one that depicted a young woman with similar features, blindfolded and bound, sitting next to an unidentified man on an Amtrak train. However, authorities determined that the woman was not Tara, and the images were not linked to her disappearance. The origin and context of the original 1989 photograph still lacked confirmation. Tara's family remained active and visible. Patty and John Dole gave frequent interviews and maintained contact with investigators. They held vigils and created awareness campaigns to keep Tara's case in public view. Over the years, they distributed thousands of flyers and remained open to any avenue that might bring closure. Despite their efforts, the official investigation faced challenges. Law enforcement agencies dealt with jurisdictional limits, resource constraints, and turnover in personnel. Files were transferred between departments. Leads were sometimes lost in the shuffle. While the case was never closed, its momentum waned in the absence of new information. In the local community, rumors persisted. Some speculated about who might have been responsible: an acquaintance, a passerby, or perhaps someone known to Tara. Others questioned whether the case had been mishandled in its early stages. Still, no arrests were made and no suspects publicly named. The silence around Tara's disappearance became its own haunting element. Even without new evidence, Tara's case continued to be listed among national missing person databases. Organizations like the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children featured her story, keeping the public engaged. Law enforcement continued to receive occasional tips, but none brought clarity. Years turned into decades. As anniversaries passed, so did people involved. Patty and John Dole eventually moved away from New Mexico, but remained committed to their daughter's memory. Tara's siblings and friends carried the search forward. They believed someone knew what had happened and hoped that someday someone would come forward. Though the road she had taken that September morning was unchanged, the mystery of what happened along its shoulder deepened with time. Tara Calico remained missing. Her case stayed open, but the silence, year after year, grew heavier. 2 decades after Tara Calico's disappearance, new interest began to grow. By the mid-2000s, her case had become one of the most recognized unsolved disappearances in New Mexico. Advances in technology and a national push to solve cold cases brought attention back to old files, and among them was the folder containing the details of Tara's ride on NM47. Local authorities began to re-examine the evidence. In 2008, Sheriff Rene Rivera of Valencia County made a public statement that reignited controversy. Rivera claimed that 2 local teenage boys, whom he did not name, had accidentally hit Tara with a truck while she was riding her bike. According to him, the incident led to panic. The individuals allegedly took her body and attempted to conceal the crime, possibly with the help of adults who were related to them. Rivera said he knew who was responsible, but lacked the physical evidence required to make an arrest or present a case in court. This announcement angered Tara's family. They had not been informed ahead of time, and they criticized the sheriff for releasing such a statement without bringing charges. Rivera's claims raised new questions. If he had credible suspects, why hadn't a grand jury been convened? Why were names withheld? And what happened to the evidence that might corroborate such a theory? The statements drew national media attention. News outlets revisited the case. The renewed exposure prompted a wave of tips, but again, nothing that would lead to an arrest. Authorities reiterated that without a body, a confession, or forensic evidence linking individuals to a crime, they could not proceed. The legal threshold remained unmet. Rivera stood by his comments, saying that people in the community had spoken to investigators over the years, and some had confessed details off the record. But the narrative he offered was unofficial and never documented through formal legal channels. His remarks fueled speculation, but yielded no legal outcome. Meanwhile, Tara's family pushed for continued investigation. They believed that Rivera's public theory might be close to the truth, but they wanted more than words. They wanted resolution through legal action. They urged those who knew anything to come forward officially and sought help from state authorities to move the case out of local jurisdiction. The theory of an accidental death followed by a cover-up had long circulated in the community even before Rivera's comments, but with no public records or indictments, it remained a theory. Law enforcement officials who had worked on the case in the late 1980s were no longer in office. New detectives inherited aging files, many of which contained notes, interviews, and observations that had not been digitized. In 2013, the FBI added Tara Calico's case to its list of unsolved crimes. The agency offered a reward for information leading to her recovery or the resolution of her disappearance. This renewed federal involvement signaled continued interest, but again, no breakthroughs. Community members who had grown up with Tara or remembered the case from their youth now had families of their own. Some were reluctant to speak, bound by fear or loyalty. Others no longer lived in the area. Investigators believed that someone still held key information, but had yet to come forward. The public remained divided. Some accepted Rivera's theory. Others believed Tara had been abducted by a stranger, possibly linked to the Polaroid or sightings across the country. Without definitive evidence, all that remained were unanswered questions and theories. Years after the sheriff's announcement, Tara Calico's case remained open, unresolved. Investigators continued to appeal for witnesses, but the trail remained cold. Over the years, several theories emerged to explain Tara Calico's disappearance, each with its own set of supporters, detractors, and implications. At the center of all of them remained the same enduring question: how could someone vanish so completely in broad daylight on a public road? The first and most enduring theory, voiced by Tara's family early on, was abduction by a stranger. Witnesses recalled a pickup truck tailing her route on the day she vanished. Some described it as white or light-colored with a camper shell, possibly bearing a logo. The idea that someone followed her, forced her into a vehicle, and escaped unnoticed aligned with the suddenness of her disappearance and the lack of physical evidence left behind. Supporters of this theory pointed to the 1989 Polaroid as a possible confirmation of captivity and movement across state lines. However, others leaned toward a theory of local involvement. Sheriff Rene Rivera's 2008 public statement suggested that two teenage boys from Belen had accidentally struck Tara with their vehicle and then covered up the incident. This theory accounted for the lack of a body, assuming those involved disposed of it and the bike to avoid consequences. Rivera claimed adult family members helped conceal the crime. Critics of this version, including Tara's family, demanded arrests if such knowledge existed. But no official charges were filed, and without forensic evidence, the theory remained unofficial. Some in the community supported this local theory, citing alleged rumors and secondhand confessions. Yet without names, dates, or corroborating material, the story remained in limbo. Law enforcement could not act solely on hearsay. Tara's parents were frustrated by the contradictions and the lack of follow-through. They believed more could be done if law enforcement moved beyond verbal statements and pursued concrete action. A third theory arose from skepticism about law enforcement's early handling of the case. Critics questioned whether the investigation had been compromised from the start. either by oversight or protection of individuals. Tara's parents expressed concern that early leads had not been pursued aggressively. The decision not to name suspects or conduct searches of specific properties fueled speculation about obstruction or missed opportunities. However, no evidence of internal wrongdoing was ever confirmed. The Polaroid photo, while still haunting, suffered from its own contradictions. Law enforcement agencies differed on whether it depicted Tara. Forensic analysis provided no consensus. The presence of the V.C. Andrews book, Tara's favorite, suggested a link, but skeptics argued that it could have been a coincidence or part of a cruel hoax. The boy in the photo was ruled out as Michael Henley after his remains were discovered, leaving the identity of both individuals unknown. Adding to the complexity were other photographs found years later, similar in style, disturbing in content, but ultimately dismissed as unrelated. These images, found on film or among lost belongings, only deepened the uncertainty. In time, the theories became as much a part of the case's legacy as the known facts. Each theory had elements of plausibility, but none offered closure. Tara's family continued to advocate for action. They maintained that someone still held the missing pieces and that silence was enabling injustice. Media coverage often reignited interest, but also risked distorting details. Documentaries, talk shows, and crime programs highlighted the case, sometimes emphasizing certain narratives over others. While this attention helped keep Tara's story alive, it occasionally muddied the facts with speculation. As the case moved deeper into history, it became a symbol of both loss and persistence. The theories remained open, unresolved, and at times conflicting. Yet the core of the story, the disappearance of a young woman with no trace, remained unchanged. What happened to Tara Calico on that September morning in 1988 was still unknown. The answers, if they existed, remained hidden, perhaps by fear, perhaps by time. Decades after Tara Calico vanished, her case remains one of New Mexico's most enduring mysteries. Though the trail has gone cold, the memory of her life continues to shape how missing persons cases are handled, investigated, and remembered. Tara was declared legally deceased in 1998, 10 years after her disappearance. The decision was procedural, required for certain legal and administrative purposes. But to her family, friends, and many who followed the case, she is still considered missing. The question of what happened along NM 47 that morning remains unanswered. In the years that followed, Tara's case was referenced in educational seminars on missing persons investigations and became a teaching point in law enforcement circles. The FBI, local authorities, and state police have all used it to illustrate the challenges of cases with no crime scene, no body, and no confirmed witness to an actual abduction. Her case helped bring awareness to the importance of immediate response protocols, better communication between agencies, and community involvement in early hours of a search. Her parents never gave up hope. Patty and John Dowell moved from Balin, but remained active in speaking about the case. They appeared on national programs and participated in public awareness efforts. Patty passed away in 2006, still without knowing what had happened to her daughter. Her death marked a solemn moment in the case, as one of its most tireless advocates was gone. Yet her efforts had already left a mark on how cases like Tara's were approached. In 2019, the FBI announced a renewed push into Tara's case, offering a reward of $20,000 for information leading to resolution. Agents stated that new interviews and forensic re-examinations were ongoing, but did not disclose specifics. The public announcement was part of a broader effort to revisit unsolved cases with modern tools, but no public breakthrough followed. As of 2025, the reward remains active, and the case is still officially open. Social media has helped keep Tara's story alive. Posts shared across platforms continue to circulate her photo, her story, and her mother's voice, preserved in interviews and public letters. Digital archives and podcasts brought the story to new generations, many of whom weren't born when she disappeared. Each retelling keeps her memory in public consciousness and renews the hope that someone might come forward. Tara's image, smiling in school photos, posing with friends, captured in moments of ordinary joy, remains a powerful reminder of the stakes. Her disappearance shaped the lives of her family and her town, leaving a space that could never be filled. Memorials to her exist not in bronze or stone, but in advocacy. Campaigns for missing persons, policy reforms, and education on what families endure. Her name appears on national registries, alongside the thousands who are missing without a trace. Her case is cited in law enforcement bulletins and academic research. It has shaped how agencies consider evidence, how families are engaged, and how the public can contribute. In that way, her story continues to affect change. Still, the core remains. Tara Calico went for a morning bike ride and never came home. The answers may still lie with someone who has remained silent. Whether through conscience or chance, the truth may yet emerge. Until then, her story continues to travel, her face continues to be seen, and her name remains spoken not just as a mystery, but as a life unfinished, an open case, and an enduring memory. Kimberly Proctor was born in 1992 and grew up in Langford, a suburban community in the western part of Greater Victoria, British Columbia. A teenager with a soft-spoken nature and a warm personality, she was remembered by those close to her as kind, caring, and empathetic. Kimberly attended Pacific Secondary School and was known among her peers as gentle and creative. She had a deep love for animals and often spent time volunteering at a local animal shelter. Her interests included reading, art, and spending time with friends. She faced some challenges socially, at times experiencing bullying at school. Despite these difficulties, Kimberly remained resilient and focused on her education. She had goals for the future and was considering career paths that involved helping others. Her use of online platforms like social networking and messaging services was typical for teenagers of her time. She maintained contact with friends, engaged in conversations about common interests, and used these digital tools to express herself. Family members described her as a bright light in their lives, someone who brought joy through her presence and her sensitivity. She often helped out at home and maintained a close relationship with her parents and younger brother. Her routines included commuting to school using public transport and spending time after school at familiar places, such as the West Shore Town Center or local parks. At just 17 years old, Kimberly was at a stage in life where she was exploring her identity, building relationships, and making plans. Her days were marked by ordinary teenage activities, school, friends, chats online, making what would follow all the more shocking. She left home on March 18, 2010, with plans to meet a friend. She was never seen alive again. On the morning of March 18, 2010, Kimberly Proctor left her Langford home to meet a friend. Her departure was unremarkable, and nothing suggested she wouldn't return. But when she failed to show up at school and didn't return home, concern quickly escalated. Kimberly was not known to run away or disappear without notice. Her absence was immediately out of character. Her parents, unable to reach her by phone, contacted police the same day. The West Shore RCMP launched a missing person investigation that evening. Officers began canvassing the neighborhood and speaking with classmates and friends. Social media posts were circulated, and her photo was shared widely. Search efforts included friends, family, and volunteers who combed areas she was known to frequent. Tips were followed up, but no sightings were confirmed. By March 19th, the case had taken on a more serious tone. Police began working under the assumption that Kimberly had not left voluntarily. Her cell phone was turned off or otherwise unreachable. Investigators reviewed surveillance footage from local transit and businesses, hoping for leads. Kimberly's friends were interviewed again, and particular attention was paid to her online interactions. Despite the growing intensity of the search, there were no concrete developments on March 19th. Authorities expanded the area of their search, including sections of nearby trails and wooded areas. The Galloping Goose Trail, a regional trail network passing through Langford, was noted as an area Kimberly sometimes walked. The community began to fear the worst. Posters bearing Kimberly's face appeared across Greater Victoria. Candlelight vigils were organized, drawing classmates, teachers, and residents. Local media coverage increased, and police issued public appeals for any information that could assist. Then, on the morning of March 20th, 2 days after Kimberly's disappearance, investigators received a call from a passerby who had found a suspicious scene near a bridge along the Galloping Goose Trail. The RCMP responded swiftly. On March 20th, 2010, 2 days after Kimberly Proctor vanished, a passerby walking near a bridge along the Galloping Goose Trail made a grim discovery. He spotted a burned object and, on closer inspection, realized it appeared to be human remains. The area was near the Coalwood section of the trail, known for its dense vegetation and relative seclusion. The RCMP quickly secured the scene. Forensic investigators arrived and confirmed that the remains were those of a young female. The body showed clear signs of having been subjected to fire. Efforts to identify the victim began immediately. Anne Kimberly's family was informed of the discovery. Although formal identification took time, police operated under the assumption it was Kimberly due to the timing and location. The condition of the body indicated an attempt to conceal or destroy evidence. Investigators noted bindings, physical trauma, and signs of deliberate mutilation. The level of violence shocked even experienced officers. The area was thoroughly examined for trace evidence, footprints, tire tracks, or any item that might have been left behind. Forensic specialists collected samples for DNA analysis and began reconstructing the sequence of events. Within hours, news of the discovery reached the public. The media reported that a body had been found, and speculation quickly centered on Kimberly. Community members gathered near the trail to leave flowers and messages. The atmosphere shifted from hopeful searching to collective grief. The RCMP held a press conference to confirm the discovery of remains and reiterated their commitment to solving the case. They refrained from naming Kimberly until a positive identification was made through dental records and DNA. Behind the scenes, investigators increased their focus on Kimberly's last known movements. Surveillance footage from buses, text message logs, and online communications became central. Her social media activity on the morning of March 18th was preserved. Investigators reviewed all chats and messages from that day, paying close attention to recent contacts and ongoing conversations. The digital trail would prove essential in identifying who Kimberly met that day and why she never came home. Following the discovery of Kimberly Proctor's body, the investigation shifted into a homicide case. The West Shore RCMP integrated additional resources, including forensic specialists and criminal profilers, to assist in the complex inquiry. Priority was placed on reconstructing Kimberly's final hours and identifying who had contact with her before her disappearance. Investigators began with her digital footprint. Her online messages, social media interactions, and text history were meticulously analyzed. A critical lead came from chat logs and messaging records from March 17th and 18, which indicated Kimberly had arranged to meet someone. This became a focal point in the investigation. Authorities interviewed classmates and friends, concentrating on relationships Kimberly had, particularly with individuals she had met online or communicated with through messaging platforms. A pair of teenage boys, Cruz Wellwood and Cameron Moffett, both from the Langford area, surfaced early in the inquiry. Both had known Kimberly from school, and initial interviews revealed they had seen her in the days before her disappearance. The investigative team conducted surveillance on the two boys and began to collect evidence from their digital communications. Forensic examination of computers and phones revealed disturbing messages between the two, including violent fantasies that closely resembled the circumstances of Kimberly's death. These exchanges were dated before March 18th, suggesting premeditation. As police deepened their scrutiny, they learned that Wellwood and Moffett had spoken in online forums and private chats about their intentions. The language used was graphic and consistent with what had happened to Kimberly. They also found digital evidence that included detailed planning and post-crime discussions. At the same time, forensic testing on evidence recovered from the scene began returning results. DNA evidence confirmed Kimberly's identity and supported the theory that she had been assaulted before being killed. Bindings and foreign DNA on the body added weight to suspicions about multiple participants. Investigators continued to build a timeline, corroborated by video footage, witness statements, and bus GPS records. Kimberly had boarded a bus on the morning of March 18th and was seen walking toward a house in Langford. That location would soon become critical. As investigators delved deeper into Kimberly Proctor's case, it became clear that digital evidence would be central to solving the crime. RCMP officers analyzed social media platforms, chat logs, and stored data from computers and cell phones. The most significant breakthrough came from the communications between Cruz Wellwood and Cameron Moffett. Wellwood and Moffett had maintained an extensive digital relationship, primarily through instant messaging platforms. Their conversations spanned months and revealed detailed plans involving sexual violence and murder. The two had exchanged disturbing fantasies and discussed potential victims, eventually deciding on Kimberly. Records showed that on March 17, 2010, Wellwood contacted Kimberly under the pretense of wanting to talk privately. He convinced her to come to his home the following morning. Surveillance confirmed Kimberly was seen walking toward his residence on March 18th. That was the last known sighting of her alive. Following her arrival, what occurred matched the violent scenarios the teens had described online. After the crime, messages between the boys showed attempts to coordinate their stories and discuss disposal of evidence. One message revealed that they believed their plan had been successful and that no one would suspect them. Digital forensic teams uncovered deleted files on Moffat's and Wellwood's computers. These included internet searches about body disposal, fire as a method to destroy DNA, and questions about police investigative techniques. There were also images and writings that glorified violence and domination. Additionally, Wellwood had a prior connection to violent crime. His father, previously convicted of murdering a woman in Mission, British Columbia, was serving a life sentence. This fact was known to police and considered during their assessment of Wellwood's background and behavioral risks. Search warrants executed on the boys' homes uncovered physical items mentioned in their messages. Zip ties, matches, and duct tape were recovered, along with clothing matching descriptions worn on March 18th. The depth of the digital trail provided overwhelming evidence of premeditation. The investigators compiled this material into a comprehensive case file. Combined with forensic evidence from the crime scene, the online communications solidified the foundation for arrests. The RCMP were now preparing to move forward decisively. By early June 2010, the RCMP had gathered enough evidence to act. On June 18th, 3 months after Kimberly Proctor's death, police arrested 17-year-old Cruz Wellwood and 16-year-old Cameron Moffett. The arrests were carried out separately but simultaneously, ensuring neither suspect had an opportunity to flee or destroy additional evidence. Wellwood was apprehended at his Langford residence without incident. At nearly the same time, officers detained Moffett at another location in the same community. Both were transported to RCMP facilities for questioning. The arrests were the result of a highly coordinated effort involving surveillance, digital forensics, and behavioral analysis. Shortly after the arrests, the RCMP held a press conference to confirm that 2 teenage males were in custody and facing charges in connection with Kimberly's murder. The community, still reeling from the brutality of the crime, was shocked to learn that the perpetrators were local boys, known to Kimberly and from the same social circles. The teens were initially charged with first-degree murder and indignity to human remains. Because of the severity and planning involved in the crime, Crown prosecutors indicated they would seek adult sentences for both. Public reaction was swift and emotional. The community demanded justice, and many expressed disbelief that youths could be responsible for such violence. Following their arrests, both suspects were placed in custody at youth detention centers. Bail was denied due to the nature of the charges and the overwhelming evidence. The court also issued a publication ban on certain details, but the names of the accused were made public after the Crown requested adult sentencing. In court, prosecutors outlined the core elements of the case: the deliberate luring of Kimberly, the brutal acts committed against her, the attempt to destroy evidence, and the defendant's explicit admissions in private messages. The investigation had produced hundreds of pages of transcripts and digital records supporting the charges. Both Wellwood and Moffett were scheduled for further hearings. Psychological evaluations were ordered, and their defense teams began reviewing the evidence. The arrests marked a turning point, but for Kimberly's family and the broader community, the road to justice was just beginning. After their arrests, Cruz Wellwood and Cameron Moffett each provided detailed statements to investigators. Both confessions revealed the extent of their planning and the chilling execution of their actions. The interviews, conducted separately, were recorded and later used as key evidence in court. Moffett confessed first. In a calm and emotionless tone, he recounted how he and Wellwood had spent weeks discussing the crime online. He described their agreement to target Kimberly, their plan to lure her to Wellwood's home, and the specific roles each would play. Moffett admitted to participating in the assault and described how they restrained Kimberly using zip ties. He confirmed the use of duct tape and the sequence of events leading to her death. Wellwood's confession closely matched Moffett's, but included additional details. He described initiating the plan and said they viewed the murder as a way to fulfill violent fantasies. He admitted they deliberately chose Kimberly because she trusted them and would be easier to lure. Wellwood explained that after Kimberly arrived at his house, they confined her to the basement, assaulted her, and ultimately killed her by asphyxiation. He also described how they moved her body using a duffel bag, transported it along the Galloping Goose Trail, and attempted to burn it under a bridge to hide evidence. They returned to the site later to check on the remains. In both confessions, the boys spoke of the crime with a disturbing lack of remorse. These statements were corroborated by forensic findings and digital records. The location of the crime matched evidence found at Wellwood's house. Blood traces, matching Kimberly's DNA, were discovered in the basement. The duffel bag and burned items from the scene matched descriptions given in their interviews. Psychological assessments ordered by the court found that both teens exhibited signs of antisocial personality traits. Neither showed significant signs of mental illness that would interfere with their understanding of right and wrong. Their actions were deemed fully conscious and deliberate. The confessions removed any ambiguity. Prosecutors now had comprehensive evidence, statements, physical proof, and a documented digital trail demonstrating premeditation and intent. The legal process now moved toward trial and sentencing. Cruz Wellwood and Cameron Moffett were formally charged with first-degree murder and committing indignity to human remains. Though both were under 18 at the time of the crime, prosecutors sought and obtained approval to try them as adults, citing the severity and calculated nature of the offense. This decision meant, if convicted, they would face adult sentences with parole ineligibility of up to 25 years. Before trial proceedings fully began, both teens entered guilty pleas. On October 27, 2010, they each pleaded guilty to all charges in British Columbia Supreme Court. The plea eliminated the need for a prolonged trial, but opened the path for a comprehensive sentencing hearing, where the Crown presented evidence to establish the nature and impact of the crime. During the hearings, the court was shown excerpts from chat logs, confessions, and psychological evaluations. Prosecutors emphasized the methodical planning, the deliberate targeting of Kimberly, and the absence of remorse shown by both offenders. Forensic details underscored the brutality of the crime, and witness statements described the emotional devastation inflicted on Kimberly's family and the community. Kimberly's parents delivered victim impact statements describing their daughter's life, her potential, and the enduring pain of their loss. They recounted how the discovery of her remains and the horrifying details of her death had shattered their family. The court also heard from friends and educators who described Kimberly's kindness and resilience. The defense offered little in mitigation. Psychological evaluations acknowledged troubling traits in both teens, particularly narcissism and violent ideation, but no evidence of mental illness that would diminish criminal responsibility. Wellwood's background, including his father's incarceration for murder, was noted but did not sway the court. On September 16, 2011, both were sentenced to life in prison, with no eligibility for parole for 10 years, the maximum under Canadian law for young offenders tried as adults. Justice Robert Johnston described the crime as a planned and prolonged act of unspeakable violence. Though a mandatory parole review was required at 10 years, the judge noted that the severity of the crime might preclude early release. The sentences ensured that both teens would remain incarcerated well into adulthood. Kimberly's family expressed relief at the outcome, but maintained that no sentence could erase their grief. For the public, the case served as a disturbing glimpse into the capacity for violence hidden behind teenage facades. In the months and years following the sentencing of Cruz Wellwood and Cameron Moffett, the impact of Kimberly Proctor's murder continued to reverberate throughout Langford and the wider community. The brutality of the crime, combined with the young age of the perpetrators, left a profound mark on public consciousness. Kimberly's family withdrew from public life for a period, struggling with the enduring trauma and loss. They later spoke about the need to raise awareness around youth violence, online safety, and the importance of early intervention. Her parents described recurring grief, worsened by the knowledge of the pain their daughter suffered in her final hours. Community members responded by organizing vigils and awareness events. Memorials appeared near the Galloping Goose Trail and at Kimberly's school. Her classmates created tributes, including art displays and scholarships in her name. The school community engaged in discussions about bullying, mental health, and digital safety. The RCMP and local authorities reviewed the case to identify lessons learned. Kimberly's interactions with the suspects had occurred through both in-person and digital channels, raising concerns about the role of technology in facilitating targeted violence. Educational institutions increased focus on cyber awareness programs and student counseling services. Media coverage of the case extended beyond British Columbia. National news outlets reported on the case's disturbing details and the broader implications for youth crime prevention. In editorials and public forums, there were calls for reforms in how violent juvenile offenders are managed within the justice system. Several groups advocated for increased access to psychological support for at-risk youth. Professionals noted that while Wellwood and Moffat had exhibited warning signs, violent fantasies, isolation, and disturbing online content, there had been no intervention. Some experts argued that better monitoring and earlier mental health assessments might have altered the trajectory. In 2020, a parole board hearing reviewed Moffat's eligibility as required under the terms of his sentence. The board denied his release, citing a lack of demonstrated remorse and ongoing concerns about risk to the public. Wellwood, likewise, remained in custody with no signs of imminent release. These hearings reopened wounds for Kimberly's family, who continued to attend and speak against any reduction in the sentences. Despite the passage of time, the case remained a defining event for the Langford community, one that exposed both vulnerabilities and resilience in the face of tragedy. In the wake of Kimberly Proctor's murder, efforts emerged to ensure her memory would contribute to positive change. Her family, supported by community members, helped establish initiatives aimed at preventing similar tragedies. One such effort was the Kimberly Proctor Memorial Youth Justice Awards, launched to recognize students who exemplify compassion, resilience, and advocacy against bullying and violence. These awards, presented annually in local schools, honor Kimberly's life by encouraging young people to stand against cruelty and to foster safer, more inclusive environments. Her story is now part of educational presentations on the dangers of online interactions and the importance of reporting concerning behavior among peers. Police agencies across British Columbia reviewed the case to improve early detection of youth radicalization and violent ideation. Training programs were updated to help officers and educators identify warning signs, such as disturbing online behavior and threats masked as fantasies. The role of social media in planning crimes led to increased collaboration between law enforcement and tech companies, particularly in monitoring anonymous and encrypted platforms. Kimberly's name also appeared in broader conversations about youth sentencing laws in Canada. Some advocated for amendments to give courts more flexibility when dealing with exceptionally violent juvenile offenders. While no direct legislative changes resulted from this case alone, it contributed to the national dialogue on the balance between rehabilitation and accountability. In the community of Langford, a permanent memorial plaque was placed near the section of the Galloping Goose Trail where Kimberly's body was found. It serves as both a tribute and a reminder of the importance of vigilance and compassion. Schools in the district marked anniversaries of her death with moments of silence, educational sessions, and student-led campaigns promoting kindness. For Kimberly's family, the years brought ongoing grief, tempered only by the support of those who remembered her as more than a victim. Friends described her creativity, her love of animals, and her gentle nature. They recalled the impact she had on others, even in a short life. Though nothing could undo the crime, Kimberly Proctor's legacy endures through education, advocacy, and community resilience. Her story continues to remind people of the importance of safeguarding vulnerable youth and holding space for those who are lost to violence. Through memory and action, her voice carries on. Marie Dean Arrington was born in 1933 in Leesburg, a small city in Lake County, Florida. Her childhood unfolded in the rural South during the depths of the Great Depression and the segregation era. While detailed records of her early family life are sparse, it is known that she came from a working-class background and grew up under circumstances that were likely difficult and unstable. The scarcity of educational and economic opportunities for women, particularly in the American South, compounded the challenges she faced. Arrington married Lester Jack Arrington in the early 1950s. The relationship was marked by volatility and mutual accusations of abuse. Their marriage would eventually produce children, and by the 1960s, Marie was a mother living in Eustis, Florida, a small town not far from where she was raised. Those who later encountered her described a woman who was both fiercely protective of her children and prone to erratic, impulsive behavior. During this time, Marie began to accumulate a record of minor offenses and run-ins with the law. Most were petty infractions, shoplifting, disorderly conduct, but they hinted at deeper issues with authority and self-control. Her defiance of law enforcement and the court system seemed to stem from a deep-seated mistrust and resentment. Friends and neighbors often characterized her as tough and independent, traits that would come to define her public image. It was also during this period that she developed an intense dislike for the legal establishment in Lake County. Her frustrations were compounded by personal financial pressures, difficulties in maintaining employment, and her contentious relationship with Lester. As the 1960s progressed, the tension in her personal life seemed to mount. Witnesses would later describe her as a woman who felt constantly persecuted and who believed that those around her, including the legal system, were conspiring against her and her family. By 1964, these tensions would culminate in a shocking act of violence that would push her into the public eye and initiate a sequence of events that would define her life, and ultimately her infamy in American criminal history. On the afternoon of March 22, 1964, Marie Dean Arrington confronted her estranged husband, Lester Jack Arrington, inside their modest home in Eustis, Florida. The marriage, long strained by mutual accusations of infidelity and abuse, had reached its breaking point. That day, a heated argument escalated with deadly consequences. Marie retrieved a firearm and shot Lester in the neck, killing him instantly. Police arrived at the scene to find Lester dead and Marie visibly distressed. She claimed she had acted in self-defense, insisting that her husband had physically assaulted her during the argument. However, investigators found inconsistencies in her account. Witness statements and the position of Lester's body cast doubt on her version of events. Despite her claims, Marie was arrested and charged with murder. During the legal proceedings, the charge was reduced to manslaughter, possibly influenced by her emotional state and allegations of domestic abuse. In 1965, she was convicted and sentenced to 20 years in prison. However, she served less than 2 years before being released on parole in early 1967, a decision that would later draw criticism from legal observers and law enforcement officials. Following her release, Marie returned to Lake County and tried to rebuild her life. But she remained entangled in legal issues, particularly regarding her children. After her incarceration, her 2 children had been placed in foster care. Marie blamed the legal system, and particularly her public defenders, for failing to protect her parental rights. Her son, in particular, had been convicted of a robbery and sent to a state reform school. She held her court-appointed lawyer responsible for what she saw as a betrayal and a failure of representation. This growing resentment festered into an obsessive grievance. Marie believed that the public defender's office, especially the attorney who represented her son, had destroyed her family. Her focus turned increasingly towards seeking retribution. It was no longer just about the perceived injustices against her. It became about vengeance. The events that followed would be driven by this anger, pushing her beyond the boundaries of the law she had already once transgressed. In the months after her parole, Marie Dean Arrington began planning what she believed would be justice for her family and particularly for her son. Her next act would not be one of passion, but of deliberation. In April 1968, the mounting fury that Marie Dean Arrington harbored toward the legal system found a target. Her son's court-appointed attorney, Bob Pierce, had represented him in a robbery case that ended in a guilty verdict and sentencing to a state institution. Marie believed Pierce had failed her son deliberately. She blamed him for the outcome and, in her mind, saw his actions as part of a broader conspiracy that had torn her family apart. Determined to confront Pierce, Marie armed herself and drove to the Lake County Public Defender's office in Leesburg. But Pierce was not there that day. Instead, she found Vivian Ritter, Pierce's 24-year-old legal secretary. Ritter was not involved in any of the cases against Marie or her family, yet on that afternoon, she became the focus of Marie's rage. Witnesses later reported seeing Marie and Vivian leaving the office together. Marie claimed she needed to speak with Pierce and convinced Ritter to accompany her under the pretense of helping her find him. The 2 women left in Marie's car. It would be the last time anyone saw Vivian Ritter alive. For nearly 2 days, Ritter was missing. Her disappearance sparked a local search. Her family and co-workers grew increasingly concerned, and law enforcement initiated a formal investigation. Suspicion soon turned to Marie, whose previous conviction and known hostility toward the public defender's office made her a primary person of interest. Ritter's body was discovered on April 24, 1968, in a remote area near Ocala National Forest. She had been shot in the head and left near an isolated stretch of land. Evidence recovered from the scene, including tire tracks and personal items, linked Marie to the location. Her vehicle matched descriptions seen near the area on the day of the murder. Following the discovery, investigators located Marie at a friend's home in Orlando. She was arrested without incident and brought in for questioning. During interrogation, she initially denied involvement, but inconsistencies in her story and the mounting physical evidence led to formal charges. She was indicted for first-degree murder and transported to the Lake County Jail to await trial. The killing shocked the local community, not only because of its brutality, but because of the victim's identity. Vivian Ritter was not a public figure, nor someone with a controversial reputation. She was a young secretary caught in the wrong place at the wrong time. Her murder felt senseless to many, a tragic consequence of a vendetta she had no part in. As the investigation proceeded, prosecutors began building a case that portrayed Marie Dean Arrington as a vengeful figure acting on deep-seated resentment. The trial would test the limits of public sympathy. and bring renewed attention to a woman whose life had already intersected with violence and law-breaking. This time, the charges were far more severe. Marie Dean Arrington's trial for the murder of Vivian Ritter began in late 1968 in Tavares, Florida. The courtroom was packed daily, filled with reporters, local residents, and legal observers drawn by the disturbing circumstances of the case. Marie, now a two-time offender facing capital charges, entered the proceedings under heavy guard and with a resolute expression that never wavered. The prosecution presented a case centered on premeditation and revenge. They argued that Marie had targeted the public defender's office out of anger at her son's legal outcome, and that Vivian Ritter had become an unintended victim of that rage. Prosecutors detailed how Marie lured Ritter from the office, transported her to a secluded location, and executed her with a single gunshot to the head. Key evidence included witness testimony from people who saw Marie and Vivian leaving together, forensic evidence from the crime scene, and items recovered from Marie's vehicle. The bullet recovered from Ritter's body matched a weapon tied to Marie, and traces of soil and foliage on Marie's clothing linked her to the wooded area where Ritter's body had been found. Marie's defense team tried to cast doubt on the timeline and argued that no direct eyewitness had seen the killing. They suggested alternative theories and emphasized Marie's mental health struggles, attempting to sway the jury toward a verdict of manslaughter or second-degree murder. However, the prosecution maintained a clear and compelling narrative. This was an act of cold revenge. After days of testimony and evidence, the jury deliberated for only a few hours. Marie Dean Arrington was found guilty of first-degree murder. The court then moved into the sentencing phase. The state sought the death penalty, arguing that the crime met the legal threshold for capital punishment due to its premeditated nature and the vulnerability of the victim. In early 1969, Marie was sentenced to death by electric chair. The judge's pronouncement made her one of only a handful of women on death row in the United States at that time, and the only one in Florida. The sentence was handed down without visible reaction from Marie. As she was escorted out of the courtroom, she remained calm and silent, offering no apology or explanation. Following the trial, she was transferred to the Florida Correctional Institution for Women in Lowell to await execution. The case left a lasting impact on the legal community in Lake County. Many viewed the outcome as justice served. Others expressed concern about the effectiveness of mental health evaluations and the handling of her earlier parole. For Marie Dean Arrington, the sentence marked a new chapter, not the end of her story, but a transition into a period defined by confinement, scrutiny, and an act that would again thrust her into national headlines. On March 1st, 1969, less than a year after being sentenced to death, Marie Dean Arrington vanished from the Florida Correctional Institution for Women in Lowell. The circumstances of her escape stunned prison officials and reignited public fear. A woman already convicted of 2 violent deaths had slipped through the state's grasp, disappearing without immediate trace. Her escape was not impulsive, it was carefully planned. Marie exploited the limited security protocols of the time, taking advantage of the trust she had cultivated among certain prison staff. She was assigned to a less secure work detail that gave her relative freedom within the prison grounds. On the day of her escape, she failed to return from a routine task. By the time a full count was conducted, she was gone. The facility, located in a remote area of Marion County, lacked perimeter fencing in some sections, making it vulnerable to breaches. It took hours before authorities confirmed that she had not simply wandered into a nearby building. When they finally initiated a broader search, Marie had already made her way beyond the immediate area. Her absence prompted a statewide alert and soon became national news. The FBI issued a warrant and placed her on its most wanted list. Media outlets across the country carried her photo, warning that she was extremely dangerous. Residents in nearby towns were advised to report any suspicious activity. Law enforcement officers combed rural areas, set up checkpoints, and investigated tips. But Marie remained elusive. Initial theories suggested she may have received outside help. Some investigators believed an accomplice had left a vehicle nearby or arranged a rendezvous point. Others suspected that she had planned a series of moves in advance, relying on sympathetic acquaintances or former inmates who owed her favors. Regardless of the method, she succeeded in evading capture far longer than expected. In the months following her disappearance, sporadic sightings were reported in several southern states, including Georgia, Alabama, and Mississippi. None were confirmed. Investigators followed hundreds of leads, many of them dead ends. Marie's ability to survive off the grid and blend into rural communities made her difficult to track. Her familiarity with Florida's back roads and small towns gave her an advantage. As the manhunt stretched into weeks and then months, pressure mounted on law enforcement. The public demanded answers. How had a condemned killer managed to escape from a state prison? Why had security protocols failed to detect her plan? Political leaders faced scrutiny, and the case prompted a review of security procedures at women's correctional facilities statewide. Meanwhile, Marie remained out of sight. She changed her appearance, used false names, and avoided contact with anyone who might alert the authorities. Her escape made her a rare figure, a woman fugitive on the FBI's radar, operating in defiance of both the legal system and public expectations. She was no longer simply a convict. She was a symbol of a system's failure. Her time on the run would eventually come to an end, but for nearly 3 years, she lived in defiance of a death sentence, hidden in plain sight. Following her escape in March 1969, Marie Dean Arrington vanished into a vast rural landscape that she knew intimately. Authorities theorized that she stayed in the southeast, where backroads, wooded terrain, and small towns offered concealment. She became one of the few women on the FBI's most wanted list, a distinction that amplified the urgency of the manhunt. Marie traveled under aliases and used cash exclusively to avoid detection. She changed her appearance, cut and dyed her hair, and adopted different clothing styles to blend in. She kept a low profile, choosing motels, diners, and gas stations with little surveillance. She avoided cities where the chance of recognition was greater, and instead passed through isolated areas that attracted less attention. Law enforcement agencies across the region shared intelligence, circulated her photo, and responded to dozens of tips. None led to her. The trail would periodically heat up with reported sightings, often vague or inconsistent, only to grow cold again. Her ability to disappear was aided by a reluctance in some communities to engage with law enforcement. In places where people distrusted the government or sympathized with a woman claiming she had been wronged by the system, Marie found silence rather than betrayal. She stayed mobile. Investigators later concluded that she never remained in one location for long, moving from state to state, sometimes sleeping in her car, other times relying on temporary jobs or rented rooms. She used a network of roadside motels and truck stops to avoid routine patterns. When she needed to make a phone call, she used payphones and left no trace. Despite intense pressure from federal and state agencies, Marie's capture remained elusive for over 2 years. During that time, she became an underground figure of morbid fascination. While most viewed her as a dangerous killer, others saw her as a symbol of defiance, a woman who had outwitted the system. Her freedom, however, was not without cost. She lived in constant fear of discovery. Any knock on a door or unfamiliar car in a parking lot could mean capture. She avoided forming close relationships, never staying in one job long enough to raise questions. Her isolation became both her protection and her punishment. In the fall of 1971, the FBI received a tip from a woman in New Orleans who had grown suspicious of a coworker. The woman, calling herself Nancy Lee, matched the description of Marie. Agents set up surveillance. After confirming her identity through fingerprints left on a discarded cigarette pack, federal agents moved in. Marie Dean Arrington was arrested in New Orleans in October 1971 without resistance. She had been working under an assumed name and living in a modest apartment. When questioned, she admitted her true identity. Her time as a fugitive, 2 years and 7 months, had ended. Authorities transported her back to Florida under heavy security. Her capture reignited public debate about her original sentencing, the failures of the correctional system, and the rare determination of a woman who had evaded justice for so long. Yet, despite the headlines, she returned not as a triumphant outlaw, but as a prisoner whose next chapter would unfold once again behind prison walls. Marie Dean Arrington's return to Florida in late 1971 was met with a mixture of relief and renewed scrutiny. The state had invested considerable resources into her capture, and her reappearance triggered a series of legal and administrative responses. Transferred under high security, she was placed in solitary confinement upon arrival at the Florida Correctional Institution for Women. Officials took no chances with the woman who had once slipped through their grasp. Her escape had not nullified her sentence. She remained under a death penalty conviction for the murder of Vivian Ritter. However, the legal landscape had shifted dramatically during her time on the run. In 1972, the U.S. Supreme Court issued a ruling in Furman v. Georgia, declaring existing death penalty statutes unconstitutional due to inconsistent application. As a result, death sentences across the country were vacated or commuted. Marie's sentence was among those affected. Her punishment was commuted from death to life imprisonment. The court's decision saved her from the electric chair, replacing execution with permanent incarceration. There would be no possibility of parole. Despite avoiding execution, Marie faced internal disciplinary hearings related to her escape. Prison officials cited violations of multiple regulations, and she was classified as a high-risk inmate. Her privileges were limited. For a time, she remained under near total isolation, confined to her cell for the majority of the day, and monitored during all movements within the facility. The Florida Department of Corrections also initiated reviews of staffing and procedural failures that had enabled her escape. The findings led to tighter restrictions and policy changes, particularly regarding work details and outside assignments for high-risk inmates. In the years that followed, security measures at the state's women's prisons grew significantly more stringent. Marie, now in her late 30s, returned to the routines of prison life. She participated in few activities and was generally described as distant, occasionally uncooperative, but not violent. She refused to speak with the press and declined to offer public statements about either her crimes or her escape. Those who interacted with her observed a woman who remained defiant, yet emotionally withdrawn. While she was no longer on death row, the consequences of her actions continued to define her daily existence. Her notoriety followed her inside the prison, where both inmates and staff knew her story. Yet, she neither sought attention nor attempted to challenge her circumstances. Her time as a fugitive was over. Now, her life would be measured in years served behind bars. The The judicial system, having once condemned her to die, now ensured she would remain confined until the end of her natural life. Marie Dean Arrington would never again walk freely outside the prison gates. In the decades following her recapture, Marie Dean Arrington remained incarcerated at the Florida Correctional Institution for Women. The media attention that had once surrounded her diminished, and the name that once dominated headlines receded into the background of prison rosters and closed case files. Within the institution, Marie settled into a routine defined by regulation and confinement. She participated in limited prison labor assignments and was permitted access to basic amenities. Her interactions were minimal. Inmates and staff who came into contact with her noted that she rarely spoke about her past. Her notoriety, though still recognized, gradually became just another chapter in the institution's long history. As the years passed, her physical health began to deteriorate. Decades of incarceration took their toll. She was transferred periodically between facilities for medical evaluations, including stints at secure medical units as her needs increased. Though never publicly detailed, her conditions required ongoing care in the final years of her life. Despite her previous sentence of death, Marie never again faced the threat of execution. The commutation of her sentence had secured her place in a different kind of permanence, one in which she would be remembered not for her rehabilitation, but for the magnitude of her crimes and the rarity of her escape. On May 10, 2014, Marie Dean Arrington died in custody at the age of 80. Her death marked the quiet end to a life that had once captivated and alarmed the public. No formal statement was released beyond confirmation of her passing by the Department of Corrections. There was no known funeral service, and her family did not publicly comment. Her death closed the final chapter of a criminal history that had spanned decades and tested the boundaries of the justice system. A woman who once defied the courts, fled from prison, and eluded capture for years had spent over 4 decades behind bars. With her passing, Florida's prison system closed its file on one of its most infamous inmates. Though she had long ceased to be a visible presence in the national consciousness, Marie's case remained part of legal and correctional training for years to follow. Her escape prompted changes in prison security policy, and her life served as a cautionary example of the consequences of systemic gaps and underestimation. In the end, she died, as she had lived in her later years, quietly, behind concrete walls, far from the headlines that had once made her a symbol of both danger and defiance. The case of Marie Dean Arrington occupies a distinct place in American criminal history. Her legacy, shaped by 2 violent deaths, a sensational escape, and nearly 5 decades of incarceration, continues to resonate within legal, correctional, and academic circles. While she was not the first woman to be sentenced to death in Florida, she remains one of the most well-known, largely due to the extraordinary events that followed her sentencing. Her 1969 escape from a state prison shocked both the public and correctional officials. It exposed significant weaknesses in security protocols at women's correctional institutions, leading to immediate reforms. Arrington's ability to evade capture for nearly 3 years prompted systemic changes in inmate classification, supervision, and movement control. In particular, high-risk designations were revised to include a broader range of behavioral indicators, not just physical violence or gang affiliation. Law enforcement agencies used her case as a training model for future manhunts, incorporating the lessons of her disappearance into fugitive tracking protocols. Her time on the FBI's most wanted list, still a rare distinction for a woman, highlighted the importance of interagency cooperation and public engagement in long-term fugitive investigations. Within the legal system, her story served as an example of the consequences of unchecked resentment and systemic mistrust. The murder of Vivian Ritter, carried out not against the attorney whom Arrington blamed, but against an innocent intermediary, demonstrated how personal grievances could metastasize into targeted violence. The randomness of Ritter's victimhood remains one of the most tragic aspects of the case. Arrington's life also sparked broader discussions about mental health and the limits of rehabilitation. While courts and correction systems have increasingly moved toward addressing the psychological needs of inmates, her case stood as a reminder of how unresolved trauma, untreated mental illness, and prolonged resentment can escalate to violence without intervention. Despite her notoriety, there was no public campaign for her release, no widespread reevaluation of her conviction, and no later movement to humanize her in popular culture. Unlike other high-profile female criminals, her story was rarely romanticized or dramatized. Her actions, premeditated, violent, and executed with clear intent, left little room for ambiguity or sympathy. For many, Marie Dean Arrington remains a figure defined by consequence. Her crimes ended lives, shattered families, and disrupted the very systems meant to administer justice. Her escape undermined public confidence, and her capture reinforced the need for vigilance. Yet her decades of quiet imprisonment, without incident or attempted escape, add a final complexity to her narrative, one not of redemption, but of resignation. Today, her name surfaces occasionally in academic studies, legal reviews, and historical accounts of women on death row. Her mugshot remains archived in state and federal databases. The events she set in motion continue to influence prison operations and legal discussions about sentencing, mental health, and inmate security. Marie Dean Arrington's legacy is not one of transformation or public absolution. It is a legacy of disruption, a life that forced institutions to confront their vulnerabilities and adapt. Her story, once headline news, now serves as a cautionary tale, embedded in the fabric of a justice system she both challenged and ultimately could not escape. Hamilton Township, New Jersey, in the summer of 1994, was a suburban community where children played freely on their tree-lined streets. The Kanka family lived on Barbara Lee Drive, a quiet cul-de-sac nestled in a modest residential neighborhood. Megan Nicole Kanka, a 7-year-old girl with a wide smile and brown hair, often rode her bicycle outside her family's home. Her parents, Richard and Maureen Kanka, considered their street safe, one where everyone knew each other. On July 29, 1994, the routine serenity was broken. Around 6:30 p.m., Megan went missing after telling her mother she was going to ride her bike and see a puppy at a neighbor's house. Hours passed, and Megan did not return. Panic set in. Her parents contacted the police, launching a search effort that quickly escalated. Local residents and law enforcement joined in a door-to-door search, covering parks, woods, and nearby roads. Authorities were drawn to a home directly across the street from the Kankas, a rented house where Jesse Timmendequist lived with 2 other men. All 3 were convicted sex offenders, a fact unknown to the neighborhood. Timmendequist, 33, had been twice convicted of sexual offenses against young girls and had recently been released from prison. Despite his record, there were no laws at the time requiring communities to be notified of sex offenders living nearby. During police questioning, Timmendequist initially denied knowing anything about Megan's disappearance. However, inconsistencies in his story raised suspicions. Eventually, he confessed. He told police he had lured Megan into his home by inviting her to see his puppy. Once inside, he sexually assaulted and murdered her, then transported her body to a nearby park. Megan's body was found in Mercer County Park the next day. Her death shocked the community and the nation. The brutal nature of the crime, coupled with the revelation of Timon Dequis's criminal history, ignited public outrage. The case would soon spark sweeping legislative changes. Following Jesse Timon Dequis's confession, the Mercer County Prosecutor's Office and Hamilton Police launched a detailed investigation. Detectives worked to corroborate his statement, collecting evidence from his home. A search of the premises uncovered physical evidence linking Megan to the scene, including fibers and items consistent with her clothing. Law enforcement meticulously documented every element of the case, aware that public scrutiny would be intense. Autopsy results confirmed that Megan had been sexually assaulted and strangled. The timeline established by investigators matched Timon Dequis's confession. Authorities transported him to the Mercer County Jail while preparing formal charges. The rapid pace of developments and the gravity of the crime brought local and national media attention. Vigils and memorials were held across New Jersey, with thousands expressing grief and solidarity with the Kanka family. In parallel, prosecutors began to explore the legal pathways for pursuing capital punishment. Given the nature of the offense, the Mercer County prosecutor announced they would seek the death penalty. In 1994, New Jersey law permitted capital punishment for cases involving murder in the commission of a sexual assault. The charges against Timon Dequis included aggravated sexual assault, kidnapping, and capital murder. Public reaction grew increasingly fervent. While police faced some criticism for not alerting the public sooner about the presence of sex offenders, there was no statutory requirement at the time. The focus quickly shifted to the system itself. Lawmakers began holding emergency meetings to examine why repeat offenders like Timon Dequis were able to resettle in residential areas without oversight. The Kanka family, devastated by their loss, emerged as vocal advocates for systemic reform. Within days of Megan's funeral, they began calling for legislation that would mandate community notification about known sex offenders. Their efforts found immediate resonance among lawmakers, setting the stage for new policy debates that would echo across the nation. The murder of Megan Kanka reverberated beyond Hamilton Township, catalyzing legislative momentum at the state level. In New Jersey, lawmakers expedited the drafting of a bill that would become known as Megan's Law. The core objective was to make the presence of convicted sex offenders public knowledge through a structured notification system. The proposed legislation gained rapid bipartisan support. By October 1994, less than 3 months after Megan's death, the New Jersey legislature passed Megan's Law. It required that local law enforcement agencies notify communities when a convicted sex offender moved into the area. The law also mandated the establishment of a sex offender registry accessible to the public. New Jersey Governor Christine Todd Whitman signed the bill into law amid intense media coverage and public advocacy. The law's immediate enactment marked a significant shift in criminal justice policy. Previously, privacy rights of offenders had largely shielded their whereabouts. Megan's Law fundamentally altered that balance, prioritizing community awareness over offender anonymity. The law categorized offenders based on risk assessment, with high-risk individuals subject to broader notification. The Kankas remained involved throughout the process, attending legislative sessions and urging swift action. Their advocacy gave a human face to the policy debate, reinforcing the urgent need for change. As Megan's Law gained attention, other states began exploring similar legislation. the federal government took notice, setting in motion discussions for a national framework. Critics raised concerns about the potential for vigilantism and whether public notification might hinder offender rehabilitation. Legal experts debated constitutional implications, including due process and equal protection. Despite opposition, the law's momentum continued. Megan's Law became a defining case study in how public tragedy can rapidly transform policy at multiple levels of government. Jesse Timmendequis's trial began in May 1997, nearly 3 years after Megan Kanka's murder. The proceedings took place in a Trenton courtroom, drawing substantial media attention. Security was heightened, and the courtroom was regularly filled with reporters, members of the public, and the Kanka family. Prosecutors presented a case built around the confession, forensic evidence, and the defendant's criminal history. Key witnesses included law enforcement officers, forensic analysts, and neighbors. The state emphasized the brutal nature of the crime, highlighting the sequence of events and Timmendequis's prior convictions. The defense focused on procedural issues, including the admissibility of the confession, and argued that their client had mental health challenges that should mitigate culpability. Throughout the trial, Megan's parents attended daily, maintaining a visible presence. Their quiet dignity was noted by observers and media alike. The prosecution argued that Timmendequis posed a continuing threat to society and that the death penalty was appropriate. After several weeks of testimony and deliberation, the jury found Timmendequis guilty on all counts: kidnapping, aggravated sexual assault, and capital murder. In June 1997, following a separate penalty phase, the jury sentenced Jesse Timmendequis to death. The verdict was received with public approval in New Jersey and beyond. For many, it symbolized a form of justice for a profoundly disturbing crime. The case did not end with the sentencing, however, as automatic appeals were triggered by the imposition of the death penalty under state law. As appeals wound through the courts, the case continued to influence public discourse around criminal justice, sentencing, and victims' rights. While Timmendequis remained on death row, the Kankas and their supporters maintained focus on expanding Megan's Law at both the federal and state levels. After receiving a death sentence, Jesse Timmendequis began the appeals process, as mandated by New Jersey law for capital cases. His legal team challenged multiple aspects of the trial, including the validity of his confession, the application of the death penalty, and alleged procedural errors. The appeals moved slowly through the courts, a process that stretched on for years due to the complexity and severity of the case. In the early 2000s, appellate courts upheld Timmendequis's conviction and sentence. His legal team continued to file motions, seeking to overturn the death penalty or secure a retrial. Throughout this period, Megan's Law remained a central topic of national legislative discussion, with states across the country adopting similar community notification systems. Meanwhile, New Jersey began to reevaluate its stance on capital punishment. By the mid-2000s, growing political and public debate over the death penalty's morality, effectiveness, and cost led to increased scrutiny. In 2007, New Jersey became the first state to legislatively abolish the death penalty since its reinstatement in 1976. All inmates on death row, including Timmendequis, had their sentences commuted to life imprisonment without parole. Timmendequis was transferred from death row to the general population of a maximum security prison. The decision sparked mixed reactions, with some seeing it as a step forward for justice reform, and others feeling it undermined the severity of the crime. The Kanka family expressed disappointment, though their advocacy for Megan's Law continued unchanged. By the late 2010s, Megan's Law was codified at the federal level through the Adam Walsh Child Protection and Safety Act, which expanded the sex offender registry system. Jesse Timmendequas remained incarcerated in New Jersey, serving a life sentence. His legal avenues narrowed, and his case became emblematic of the broader debates around criminal justice, victims' rights, and legislative accountability. The murder of Megan Kanka and the subsequent policy changes left a lasting imprint on American society. Megan's Law, originally enacted in New Jersey, became a nationwide standard for community notification and offender registration. By the early 2000s, all 50 states had implemented some version of the law, reflecting a broad consensus on the need for public awareness in protecting children from sexual predators. The Kanka family transformed their grief into advocacy. They established the Megan Nicole Kanka Foundation, which focused on child safety initiatives, public education, and legislative reform. Through the foundation, the family worked with schools, community groups, and lawmakers to promote awareness of child abuse prevention and to support families affected by violent crime. The law's implementation was not without challenges. Critics pointed to inconsistent enforcement across states, privacy concerns, and the risk of pushing offenders underground. Still, supporters argued that any tool that could help prevent future tragedies was a necessary safeguard. The Federal Sex Offender Registration and Notification Act, SORNA, built upon Megan's Law by creating minimum standards for state programs and enhancing coordination across jurisdictions. Public databases allowed citizens to access information about registered sex offenders, influencing decisions about housing, schooling, and neighborhood engagement. Law enforcement agencies developed protocols for notification and community meetings. While debate about the effectiveness of these measures persisted, Megan's Law undeniably altered the legal and cultural landscape around child protection. Megan's name became synonymous with child safety legislation. Her story is frequently cited in policy discussions, criminology studies, and advocacy campaigns. Annual remembrances and community events continue to honor her memory. For many, Megan represents not just a victim of a tragic crime, but a symbol of societal commitment to safeguarding the most vulnerable. In the years following the abolition of the death penalty in New Jersey, Jesse Timmendequas remained imprisoned at New Jersey State Prison in Trenton. His health reportedly declined, and he lived in near isolation. He no longer participated in legal proceedings after his final appeals were exhausted. Despite attempts by his legal counsel to revisit aspects of his conviction, no court granted additional hearings or relief. By the early 2020s, public interest in the case resurfaced occasionally through media retrospectives and legislative anniversaries. For the Kanka family, the pain remained constant, even as they continued their advocacy work. They remained steadfast in their mission to prevent other families from experiencing similar tragedy. On October 2, 2023, Jesse Timmendequas died in prison at the age of 60. The cause of death was reported as natural, ending nearly 3 decades of incarceration. His death reignited discussions about the justice system, capital punishment, and the enduring legacy of Megan's Law. For many, it was a quiet conclusion to one of the most emotionally charged criminal cases in New Jersey history. Following his death, renewed attention was given to the policies and public awareness campaigns inspired by Megan Kanka's story. The Megan Nicole Kanka Foundation continued its efforts, and legislative bodies periodically reviewed and updated the frameworks established by Megan's Law. As child protection policies evolved, the case of Megan Kanka remained a critical reference point, a reminder of the stakes and the societal responsibility to safeguard the innocent. Decades after Megan Conka's death, the changes her case brought to American criminal justice remain embedded in the national conscience. Megan's law altered the relationship between citizens and law enforcement, emphasizing proactive awareness over reactive intervention. Communities became more engaged in monitoring their own safety, and the public's expectation for transparency in criminal justice policies grew significantly. Educators, parents, and child advocates cite the case as a turning point in discussions about child safety. Megan's story is part of training sessions for law enforcement, academic curricula on public policy, and legislative debates across jurisdictions. Her legacy endures in both symbolic and practical ways, in the laws that bear her name and in the lives potentially saved through preventative measures inspired by her tragedy. The balance between civil liberties and public protection continues to evolve, and Megan's law remains central to these conversations. Its expansion under federal frameworks demonstrates how a localized event can influence broad national policy. Legislators, scholars, and courts still reference the law when assessing similar statutes and related legal challenges. The Conka family's resilience and commitment are recognized as instrumental in these developments. Their personal loss became a public call to action, ensuring that Megan's voice, though silenced, continues to speak through reforms that protect countless children. Their advocacy carved a path that many others have followed in fighting for victims' rights and stronger community safeguards. As each year passes, the significance of the case is measured not only in the legislative record, but in the collective memory of a society that refused to ignore a preventable tragedy. Megan's story, preserved in law, foundation work, and public discourse, serves as a somber yet resolute reminder. The lives of the vulnerable must be guarded with vigilance, transparency, and unwavering commitment. In the years following Jesse Timmendequis's death, the mission to protect children from sexual predators continued with renewed focus. The Megan Nicole Kanka Foundation expanded its reach, hosting educational seminars, sponsoring school safety programs, and lobbying for stricter enforcement of registration and notification laws. The foundation partnered with organizations nationwide to promote child safety awareness campaigns and provide support to victims' families. Legislators in various states began revisiting their own sex offender policies to align more closely with federal standards and reflect evolving community needs. Technological advances allowed for improved tracking of offenders and real-time updates to registries. Mobile applications and community alert systems were introduced to supplement traditional notification methods, bringing information directly to families' fingertips. Efforts also focused on addressing gaps in offender rehabilitation and reintegration, attempting to balance public safety with humane correctional practices. Some jurisdictions introduced treatment programs aimed at reducing recidivism while maintaining firm oversight. These initiatives reflected a broader understanding that prevention and post-conviction monitoring must go hand in hand. Survivors and their families played a growing role in legislative processes, sharing personal stories to illustrate the real-world impact of policy decisions. Victims' rights advocates called for additional support services, including mental health care, legal assistance, and emergency resources for those affected by abuse. Megan Kanka's case continued to serve as a central example of the importance of listening to survivors and ensuring their experiences guide reforms. On the 30th anniversary of Megan's death, communities across the country held remembrance events. Vigils, runs, and educational drives honored her memory, and reaffirmed commitments to protecting children. The Kankas, still central figures in the movement they helped shape, spoke of both the pain of loss and the pride in the legacy their daughter left behind. Megan's story had transformed from an individual tragedy into a national pledge of protection. Lindsay Ann Hawker was born on December the 30th, 1984, in Brandon, Warwickshire, England. The eldest of 3 daughters, she was raised in a close-knit family. Friends and relatives described her as thoughtful, bright, and compassionate. From a young age, Lindsay showed an interest in languages and cultures, a passion that would later guide her across the world. After completing her A-levels, she enrolled at the University of Leeds to study biology. Her academic performance was commendable, and she graduated in 2006 with a degree and a clear sense of direction. Inspired by a desire to explore and teach, she decided to travel to Japan, where she secured a position at the Nova Language School. It was a choice born out of curiosity and ambition, a gap-year decision before considering graduate studies. Lindsay arrived in Japan in October 2006. She settled in Ichikawa, Chiba Prefecture, a suburban area east of Tokyo. The transition was not without its challenges. Living in a foreign country with a vastly different language and culture demanded adaptability, but Lindsay approached it with openness and determination. She made friends with fellow expatriates and colleagues at the school, gradually building a new life in a foreign land. Nova, one of Japan's largest private English conversation schools at the time, employed many foreign instructors. Lindsay taught several students daily, focusing on conversational English. Students admired her teaching style, and co-workers respected her professional demeanor and kind nature. Outside of work, she enjoyed exploring Tokyo, writing emails home, and maintaining close contact with family and friends. Her journals and messages conveyed both excitement and the occasional fatigue of adjusting to new surroundings. Her routine in Japan soon became familiar. Morning commutes, lesson planning, and evenings spent socializing with friends or reading. She was careful, often cautious, and maintained a steady rhythm in her daily life. Nothing in her early months in Japan suggested the danger that would eventually confront her. By early 2007, Lindsay had settled into her role at Nova and was considering returning to the UK later that year. Her time in Japan, though short, had been marked by independence and growth. Her plans remained flexible, open to change, but her ultimate goal was to continue studying, possibly teaching, perhaps working in healthcare. Her decision to tutor privately on the side was not uncommon among language teachers in Japan. Private lessons offered supplementary income and a chance to connect more closely with students. It was through this arrangement that Lindsay met a young man near Gyotoku Station, an encounter that, in time, would place her in a situation she could never have anticipated. On March 20th, 2007, 5 days before her disappearance, Lindsay Hawker was approached by a man outside Gyotoku Station. The man, later identified as Tatsuya Ichihashi, engaged her in conversation. He spoke in English and expressed admiration for her language skills. Witnesses reported that he followed her briefly before initiating a dialogue. Lindsay, though initially hesitant, spoke with him for a short time. Ichihashi presented himself as a language student. He showed Lindsay a notebook containing English phrases and requested a private lesson. Polite but cautious, Lindsay declined but reportedly felt pressured by his persistence. Eventually, she agreed to meet him again, under the premise of arranging a formal English lesson. That evening, Lindsay discussed the incident with her boyfriend and friends. Her unease was evident. She recounted the man's behavior, noting that he had followed her home and waited outside her apartment building. Despite her discomfort, She believed it would be safe to proceed with one meeting in a public place. She also notified her colleagues and boyfriend about the planned session, providing details in case anything seemed suspicious. The man, Tatsuya Ichihashi, was 28 years old and lived not far from Lindsay's apartment. He had no prior criminal convictions, but was known to be reclusive. Ichihashi came from a well-off family, with parents in the medical profession. Despite his academic background in marine biology, he had not pursued a stable career and lived off family support. On March 24th, Lindsay arranged to meet Ichihashi the following day. The lesson was scheduled for the afternoon of March 25th at a public cafe. She intended it to be brief. According to those close to her, she remained cautious but did not feel an immediate threat. Lindsay's decision to meet Ichihashi was not taken lightly. As a language teacher, she often dealt with strangers, but she followed protocols, choosing public venues and informing others of her plans. However, Ichihashi's behavior, his persistence, the way he lingered near her home, left her wary. The hours before their meeting passed uneventfully. Lindsay prepared as she normally would. On the morning of March 25th, she left her apartment and met Ichihashi as arranged. The two went to a cafe in Ichikawa. Witnesses later confirmed seeing them there, speaking quietly over drinks. She had her teaching materials with her and appeared composed. Following the cafe visit, Ichihashi asked Lindsay to accompany him briefly to his nearby apartment. He claimed he had forgotten his wallet and needed it to pay for the lesson. Reluctantly, Lindsay agreed. It was a decision shaped by social politeness, habit, and perhaps the hope of concluding the encounter without confrontation. This moment, her choice to follow him, marked a critical turning point. From then, she was no longer visible in public. Her failure to return home later that day signaled the beginning of a frantic search. But, at the time, there was no indication of what would soon unfold behind closed doors. Lindsay Hawker was last seen alive on the afternoon of March 25, 2007. After completing their English lesson at a cafe, she followed Tatsuya Ichihashi to his apartment in Ichikawa under the pretense that he needed to retrieve money to pay her. Surveillance footage later confirmed their arrival at the building. Lindsay entered with him around 1 p.m., carrying her bag and teaching materials. She would not be seen again. Ichihashi's apartment was located on the third floor of a small residential block. It was a compact unit, ordinary in appearance. The events that unfolded inside would only be revealed later. But what is known comes from the investigation and Ichihashi's eventual confession. When Lindsay failed to return home that evening, her flatmate and boyfriend grew concerned. She had made plans to meet friends that night, but never arrived. Calls to her phone went unanswered. By the next morning, March 26th, Lindsay's employer, Nova, was notified of her absence from work. Her colleagues, aware of her plans to meet a student, informed the police. Her disappearance was immediately treated with urgency. Police visited the cafe where she had conducted the lesson and obtained details about the man she had met. Staff confirmed Ichihashi's identity and said he had been a customer before. Investigators traced his residence and arrived at his apartment around 11 a.m. on March 26th. When officers knocked on the door, Ichihashi reportedly hesitated. As they attempted to question him, he suddenly fled through the balcony. He dropped to the ground below and ran barefoot. Despite a brief chase, he escaped. Officers searched the apartment and made a horrifying discovery. In the bathroom, inside a large bathtub filled with sand and composting soil, they found the body of a young woman. It was Lindsay. She had been bound and gagged. An autopsy later confirmed she had been strangled to death. Her face showed signs of assault. The positioning of her body and the efforts to conceal it indicated a premeditated attempt to delay decomposition. The apartment was littered with evidence. Lindsay's belongings, including her teaching notebook and bag, were inside. Investigators found containers of soil, gardening tools, and other items suggesting Ichihashi had planned to hide her body permanently. Forensics concluded that she was likely killed on the same day she arrived at the apartment. The brutality and concealment deeply shocked both the Japanese public and observers abroad. Lindsay, a young teacher thousands of miles from home, had been lured into a trap in what appeared to be a premeditated act. Police launched a nationwide alert for Ichihashi, who had vanished without a trace. As word reached the UK, Lindsay's family was informed. Within days, her parents and sisters flew to Japan to assist the investigation and seek justice. Their arrival brought immediate attention to the case. Media coverage increased and public sympathy grew, amplifying pressure on law enforcement to find the man responsible. The final hours of Lindsay's life were marked by deception and violence. Her disappearance, so sudden and unexpected, triggered a chain of events that would become one of Japan's most high-profile manhunts. As police combed through Tatsuya Ichihashi's apartment following his escape, the full extent of the crime became evident. Lindsay Hawker's body had been concealed in a bathtub on the balcony, partially buried in a mixture of sand and compost. The bathroom was humid, the soil dampened to accelerate decomposition. Plastic sheeting and gardening tools suggested a deliberate effort to hide her body. Investigators determined that Lindsay had been restrained and strangled. Tape was found around her wrists, and her mouth had been taped shut. Her injuries indicated she had resisted. There were signs of blunt force trauma, and evidence showed she had fought back in the moments before her death. Time of death was estimated to be shortly after her arrival at the apartment on March 25th. Forensic teams cataloged items from the apartment. Lindsay's shoes, handbag, and teaching materials were all present. Ichihashi had remained in the apartment overnight following the murder. It was only when police arrived the next morning that he made his escape. His ability to flee, despite being confronted directly, prompted criticism. Authorities later acknowledged procedural gaps during the attempt to detain him. Outside the building, neighbors expressed shock. Many had seen nothing unusual. Some reported a quiet young man who rarely interacted with others. Others remembered strange activity, including construction sounds and the smell of soil coming from the apartment. But until the police arrived, no one had suspected the extent of what had occurred. As Ichihashi fled, Japan's National Police Agency issued a warrant for his arrest. Wanted posters were printed and distributed across the country. His profile, thin build, approximately 5'10", with distinctive features, was shared across media channels. The public was warned that he might be dangerous and asked to report any sightings. Meanwhile, Lindsay's family arrived in Japan and met with investigators. They visited the apartment block and spoke to the media, urging Ichihashi to surrender. Their presence added a human face to the tragedy and galvanized support. Vigils were held in both Japan and the UK, and messages of condolence poured in from around the world. Investigators also delved into Ichihashi's background. He was born in 1979 in Gifu Prefecture, studied marine biology at Chiba University, and was known to have few friends. He had never held a long-term job and often lived in semi-isolation. Interviews with acquaintances revealed a pattern of awkward social behavior and withdrawn tendencies. Despite his education and family background, he had no known profession at the time of Lindsay's death. The pressure on law enforcement to find Ichihashi mounted. Surveillance footage of his escape was scrutinized. Leads trickled in, but none resulted in capture. Police conducted extensive checks in areas he was believed to frequent, but he remained at large. The discovery of Lindsay's body and Ichihashi's escape marked a turning point. What had begun as a missing person case had turned into a national manhunt. Her death became symbolic, a reminder of vulnerability, a call for justice. Across Japan, posters bearing her image and that of her killer served as a constant public plea for resolution. Following Tatsuya Ichihashi's escape on March 26, 2007, law enforcement launched one of the most intensive manhunts in modern Japanese history. Within hours, nationwide alerts were issued. Police departments across the country were instructed to remain on watch. His image was broadcast widely, on television, in newspapers, and across train stations and public buildings. The fugitive was described as slim, about 180 centimeters tall, and possibly carrying minimal belongings. Ichihashi had escaped barefoot, wearing only a backpack. He had no known vehicle and limited access to cash. Despite these disadvantages, he evaded immediate capture. His ability to disappear in an urban area raised questions. Public confidence in law enforcement was shaken. Criticism mounted over how an unarmed suspect had managed to flee from multiple officers outside his own home. In the days that followed, search efforts expanded. Police checked parks, internet cafes, hostels, and capsule hotels. Tips came in from across the country, often false leads. Despite intensive operations, Ichihashi left no digital footprint. He did not use credit cards or mobile phones. Surveillance failed to detect his movements. Investigators suspected he may have used aliases or relied on cash. Lindsay Hawker's parents remained in Japan throughout this period. They appeared in media interviews, pleading for Ichihashi to surrender. Their statements were clear and measured, reflecting deep sorrow and determination. Their presence maintained pressure on Japanese authorities and kept the case in the public eye. A reward was established, eventually reaching 10 million yen, about 65,000 pounds, for information leading to his capture. This unprecedented amount underscored the seriousness of the case. Posters of Ichihashi were updated to include age-progressed images, anticipating changes in appearance. His photo was visible in post offices, convenience stores, and major public areas. Months turned into years. Despite repeated appeals, Ichihashi remained elusive. There were occasional sightings, one in Osaka, another near Fukuoka, but each proved unsubstantiated. He became a ghost figure in the national consciousness, remembered through media cycles and periodic updates from police. The mystery of his whereabouts became the subject of documentaries and investigative reports. Lindsay's family made repeated visits to Japan. They met with law enforcement officials, attended memorials, and engaged with advocacy groups. Their public statements emphasized the importance of justice, not vengeance. In the UK, support grew for them as they navigated foreign legal systems and a painful wait without resolution. The manhunt influenced police procedures in Japan. The National Police Agency reviewed pursuit protocols and issued new guidelines for apprehending suspects during home searches. Greater cooperation between regional police departments was also emphasized. Lindsay's case, tragic in its details, became a reference point for reform. While the public's focus occasionally drifted to other events, the image of Ichihashi remained. For over 2 years, he was Japan's most wanted fugitive. Every reported sighting reignited headlines. But he left behind no definitive trail. Speculation abounded. Was he hiding in the countryside, in plain sight in Tokyo, or had he left the country? the truth would only emerge after a remarkable and unexpected twist. For over 2 years after Lindsay Hawker's murder, Tatsuya Ichihashi lived in hiding. He changed his appearance drastically and avoided all digital and social contact. His movements during this period remained largely unknown until his eventual arrest and later accounts, including a memoir he published in 2011. After escaping police on March 26, 2007, Ichihashi initially slept in parks and construction sites around Tokyo. He used his remaining cash cautiously and avoided interactions. To avoid detection, he refrained from using public transportation extensively and relied on walking or biking. During this phase, he lost significant weight and maintained minimal contact with others. He eventually found low-paying, off-the-books work in construction and port jobs in various cities, including Osaka and Nagoya. These environments allowed him to stay anonymous. He used a variety of aliases and avoided submitting paperwork that would require identity verification. The transient nature of such jobs helped him remain undetected. Most notably, Ichihashi underwent multiple cosmetic surgeries to alter his facial features. Over time, he had procedures on his nose, jaw, and eyelids, even performing minor alterations on himself. These surgeries cost hundreds of thousands of yen. At one clinic in Osaka, staff became suspicious due to his insistence on anonymity and the frequency of his visits. Eventually, a staff member recognized him from wanted posters and contacted the police, though it took months for a positive identification. During his time on the run, Ichihashi also kept a notebook. In this self-written journal, he documented his life in hiding and expressed remorse for the crime. He described feelings of guilt and detailed his efforts to avoid capture. He referred to Lindsay's death as a tragic outcome of events he did not originally plan, though this claim was viewed with skepticism. His writings revealed a man tormented by fear and regret, but focused on self-preservation. Ichihashi became increasingly paranoid. He limited his time in public and often wore masks and hats to avoid being recognized. He reportedly lived in a series of small, cash-rented apartments. In these spaces, he maintained a strict, isolated existence. He read books, watched the news, and avoided neighbors. His lifestyle was solitary, with survival as his only priority. Despite the elaborate effort to conceal himself, Ichihashi's appearance eventually gave him away. A plastic surgery clinic in Nagoya became the turning point. In late 2009, staff recognized his altered but still familiar features. When questioned about his identity, he provided a false name and address. Suspicious, the clinic contacted the authorities, who launched a coordinated effort to track him. On November 10, 2009, Tatsuya Ichihashi was apprehended at the Osaka ferry terminal. He had planned to board a ferry to Okinawa, likely to move again and continue hiding. Plainclothes officers approached and detained him without incident. After verifying his identity through fingerprints, police confirmed the arrest. The manhunt, after 31 months, had finally ended. His capture brought immediate relief to Lindsay Hawker's family. They issued a statement expressing gratitude to the Japanese police and the public. Their long wait for answers was not over, but a critical step toward justice had been taken. Following his arrest on November 10, 2009, Tatsuya Ichihashi was transported to Chiba Prefecture for interrogation. He initially refused to speak. For 2 weeks he remained silent, avoiding eye contact with investigators. During this time, he was subjected to medical evaluations to ensure his fitness for questioning. Authorities hoped the weight of evidence and the years spent in hiding would compel him to cooperate. Eventually, Ichihashi began to talk. His confession was fragmented but detailed. He admitted to inviting Lindsay Hawker to his apartment under the pretense of paying for an English lesson. He claimed that after their arrival, an argument escalated and he assaulted her. He described how he bound her hands and restrained her. According to his statement, he held her captive for several hours. Ichihashi said that during this time, he attempted to prevent her from screaming. At some point, he strangled her. His version of events was that the killing was not premeditated. He insisted that his actions were impulsive, fueled by panic and fear of being reported. He did not offer a clear motive for the initial attack. Investigators challenged this narrative. The presence of tape, soil, and materials to conceal the body pointed to planning. They argued that Ichihashi's actions after the killing, cleaning the apartment, burying the body in a bathtub, and fleeing, showed deliberate effort to avoid detection. His years in hiding further undermined the claim of panic-driven behavior. The evidence against him was overwhelming. Forensics linked Lindsay's blood and DNA to multiple surfaces in the apartment. Her personal belongings were found undisturbed. Neighbors confirmed seeing Ichihashi carrying bags of soil. Surveillance footage and witness testimonies placed him at key locations before and after the murder. His escape from the police further solidified the case. Legal proceedings began with a series of preliminary hearings. Ichihashi's defense acknowledged his guilt, but emphasized the absence of premeditation. They argued that the killing should not be treated as murder with intent, but rather as an accidental death following unlawful confinement. Prosecutors dismissed this framing, focusing on the brutality of the crime and the efforts to dispose of the body. As the confession became public, reaction was swift. Lindsay's family, still in Japan, expressed their anguish and hope for justice. Her father read a statement outside the courthouse, describing their pain and the strength they drew from Lindsay's memory. In the UK, the case continued to receive wide coverage, with renewed attention to Japan's legal system and the complexities of extradition, custody, and victim rights. Japanese citizens followed the case closely. Public sentiment overwhelmingly supported a severe sentence. The notion that Ichihashi had lived in relative freedom for over 2 years while the Hawker family suffered fueled calls for a strong judicial response. The confession, while offering closure to some questions, also exposed contradictions and left many unanswered. The next phase was the formal indictment. On December 23, 2009, Ichihashi was charged with multiple crimes: rape resulting in death, unlawful confinement, and abandonment of a corpse. Prosecutors opted not to seek the death penalty, instead requesting life imprisonment. Their decision was guided by legal standards and the complexities surrounding confessions and evidence. As the trial date approached, the courtroom became the final arena where the case's details would be examined. For Lindsay's family, it marked the beginning of the legal reckoning they had sought since March 2007. The trial of Tatsuya Ichihashi began on July 4, 2011, at the Chiba District Court. Public interest was intense. Media outlets from Japan and abroad covered the proceedings extensively. Due to the case's profile, courtroom seats were limited, with thousands entering a lottery system for access. The trial was expected to last several weeks, with testimony from police, forensic experts, and witnesses. Ichihashi faced 3 charges: rape resulting in death, unlawful confinement, and abandonment of a corpse. Prosecutors laid out their case with methodical detail. They argued that Ichihashi had lured Lindsay Hawker to his apartment under false pretenses, and that his actions following her arrival showed intent to commit sexual assault. The presence of restraints and evidence of force supported this. They further asserted that he killed her to prevent her from reporting the assault. In court, Ichihashi appeared subdued. Dressed in a dark suit, he read from prepared notes during his testimony. He admitted to causing Lindsay's death, but denied premeditation and intent to rape. He stated that the situation escalated beyond his control, resulting in an accidental killing. He claimed to have panicked and tried to cover up the crime rather than face the consequences. The defense focused on this argument that the death was not the result of deliberate planning, but a spontaneous act during an emotional breakdown. They argued that Ichihashi had shown remorse by turning himself in, a claim prosecutors disputed. They reminded the court that he had only been captured due to a tip-off and had lived under false identities for over 2 years. Lindsay's family attended the trial. They remained composed, listening as harrowing details were recounted. Statements from them were read in court. Her father described the devastating impact of her loss and the pain of the years spent without answers. Her mother spoke of Lindsay's character, her aspirations, and the injustice of her fate. Their words were direct and powerful. Forensic experts provided crucial testimony. They explained the condition of Lindsay's body, the injuries sustained, and the attempts to conceal the evidence. Medical professionals refuted the defense's suggestion of an accidental death, indicating that the strangulation was forceful and prolonged. The sequence of events, they argued, pointed to intentional harm. Closing arguments were delivered on July 19th. Prosecutors reiterated the calculated nature of the crime, urging the court to sentence Ichihashi to life imprisonment. They emphasized the need for justice, deterrence, and acknowledgement of the severity of his actions. The defense requested leniency, citing cooperation, post-arrest, and psychological stress. On July 21, 2011, the court delivered its verdict. Tetsuya Ichihashi was found guilty on all counts. The judge rejected the defense's claim of accidental death, stating the evidence clearly demonstrated intent. He was sentenced to life imprisonment, with the possibility of parole after serving a minimum of 20 years, as per Japanese sentencing norms. The courtroom was silent as the sentence was read. Lindsay's family expressed relief, but noted the sentence could never fully account for their loss. Outside the court, her father stated that while justice had been served, their grief remained unchanged. They thanked Japanese authorities and the public for support throughout the ordeal. The verdict concluded a legal process that had stretched over 4 years. For many, it was the final chapter in a painful saga. For Lindsay's family, it marked the beginning of life without further pursuit, an end to the case, though not to their mourning. Following the sentencing of Tatsuya Ichihashi, the aftermath of Lindsay Hawker's murder continued to ripple through both Japan and the United Kingdom. Public and institutional responses reflected the weight of the case, as discussions expanded beyond the courtroom to broader questions of justice, safety, and the treatment of foreign residents in Japan. Lindsay's family, after the verdict, made several public appearances. They returned to the UK shortly after the trial's conclusion, where they were met with a wave of sympathy. In interviews, they expressed gratitude for the Japanese legal system, but remained critical of the initial police response that allowed Ichihashi to escape. They advocated for reforms in arrest protocols and improvements in procedures for handling missing persons cases involving foreigners. In Japan, the case prompted a nationwide review of police practices. The Ministry of Justice and the National Police Agency issued new guidelines regarding the securing of suspects during home visits. Special emphasis was placed on supervision during high-risk searches, particularly in cases involving serious crime. Training materials for officers were updated to include scenarios based on the Ichihashi escape. Among expatriate communities in Japan, particularly English teachers and language instructors, there was a heightened sense of vulnerability. Many schools and institutions introduced new safety measures, including stricter vetting procedures for private lessons and emergency protocols for solo instructors. Some teachers reported increased caution in accepting students they did not know well, especially for lessons held outside formal school settings. Media outlets in both countries published retrospectives analyzing the case. Several focused on Ichihashi's background, scrutinizing signs of social withdrawal and unaddressed behavioral issues. Others examined Lindsay's life, highlighting her aspirations and the tragedy of her fate. Documentaries and long-form reports detailed the timeline, bringing renewed focus on violence against women and the importance of systemic responses. In the UK, members of Parliament referenced the Hawker case during debates about international legal cooperation and victim support. Charitable organizations used the case to raise awareness around safety for travelers and young professionals abroad. Campaigns emphasizing informed travel, contact systems for solo workers, and communication tools gained momentum. Despite the life sentence handed down, Ichihashi retained the right to parole under Japanese law. This clause became a subject of concern for the Hawker family. Though parole eligibility does not equate to release, the family expressed discomfort with the possibility. They called for ongoing review and transparency in parole processes for violent offenders. Lindsay's story also resonated with advocacy groups focused on victim rights. Her case became a teaching tool for criminal justice reform seminars and international cooperation forums. Law enforcement agencies included her story in training modules dealing with foreign victims and interjurisdictional challenges. Anniversaries of Lindsay's death were marked by tributes. Friends and family in the UK organized memorial runs and fundraising events in her name. In Japan, teachers and colleagues held moments of silence at Nova schools and placed flowers outside the Ichikawa apartment building. Though the apartment was eventually vacated and repurposed, it remained a symbolic location for many who remembered the case. The Hawker family's resilience and dedication kept public memory alive. They continued to speak out, reminding audiences of Lindsay's humanity, her kindness, intellect, and dreams. In doing so, they shifted the narrative away from the crime alone and toward the person she was, and the life unjustly stolen from her. The legacy of the Lindsay Hawker case remains significant nearly 2 decades after her death. It left lasting changes in public awareness, legal processes, and international cooperation between the UK and Japan. Lindsay's story became more than a tragedy. It became a catalyst for reform and a symbol of resilience for her family and others affected by violence abroad. In Japan, the police and judicial systems took long-term lessons from the case. Training manuals for officers now reference the circumstances of Ichihashi's escape as a failure in procedure. Arrest protocols were revised to ensure better supervision and risk assessment during suspect interactions. Several regional police departments adopted stricter guidelines for handling reports involving foreign nationals to minimize delay and communication gaps. Language schools across Japan improved their safety policies. Companies implemented mandatory check-in systems for instructors teaching private or off-site lessons. Staff were given safety training, and new contracts included guidelines to ensure lessons were conducted in safe, public spaces. These changes, directly linked to Lindsay's case, aim to reduce vulnerability among foreign educators. In the UK, Lindsay's family became advocates for victim support and international legal assistance. They engage with government officials and support groups to push for stronger protections for citizens living and working abroad. Their efforts contributed to expanded outreach programs for British nationals, including travel safety briefings and emergency contact services. Tatsuya Ichihashi remains incarcerated. Under Japanese law, he will be eligible for parole after serving 20 years, but release is not automatic. Parole boards consider behavior in prison, rehabilitation progress, and the impact on victims' families. As of 2025, no updates suggest a change in his imprisonment status. Lindsay's family has consistently expressed that any release would dishonor her memory and the pain endured. Ichihashi's 2011 memoir, which recounted his years in hiding, sparked controversy. Critics condemned it as an attempt to shape public perception, while some questioned the ethics of allowing a convicted murderer to profit from their story. Royalties from the book were reportedly seized or directed to victim support organizations, following public backlash and legal scrutiny. Culturally, the case inspired several books, documentaries, and dramatizations in Japan and abroad. While some works focused on the crime's sensational aspects, others centered on the investigation, the family's pursuit of justice, and systemic challenges. The Hawkers remain selective in their engagement, choosing carefully when and how to participate in public storytelling. Lindsay's name is now associated with education and peace. A scholarship fund was established in her honor to support students studying biology, the subject she loved. Memorial trees were planted in Brandon and Leeds. Annual events in her memory promote cross-cultural understanding, educational exchange, and women's safety initiatives. Beyond institutions, Lindsay's legacy endures in the private lives she touched. Friends remember her for her intelligence, kindness, and spirit. Former students have spoken of her patience and encouragement. The Hawker family continues to preserve her story, not as a tale of violence, but as a testament to the values she lived by. Through advocacy, reform, and remembrance, Lindsay Hawker's life and legacy continue to influence policy, safety practices, and public consciousness. Though her story began with hope and ended in tragedy, its impact remains far-reaching, reminding future generations of the cost of violence and the strength of those who seek justice. Jessica Gawi was born on March 10th, 1987, in San Antonio, Texas. Raised in a close-knit family, she developed a deep connection with her community and a lively sense of humor that endeared her to friends and relatives. Her childhood was marked by a strong sense of curiosity and a growing passion for sports. From a young age, she displayed a deep love for hockey, which would become a defining element of her personal and professional life. Jessica's early interests extended beyond playing or watching sports. She harbored ambitions of working in the sports industry, not as an athlete, but behind the scenes, telling the stories of games and the people who played them. Her goal was to become a sports journalist, a field that, though traditionally male-dominated, did not deter her enthusiasm or sense of purpose. She attended local schools in San Antonio, where she was known for her vibrant personality and clear determination. Her affinity for communication led her toward media studies, and she soon began pursuing opportunities in radio and broadcasting. Her internships at local San Antonio sports radio stations gave her a taste of the profession and confirmed her resolve to make a name for herself in the field. Jessica was industrious in building her profile. She took on roles that allowed her to hone her reporting skills, learning how to interview athletes, analyze games, and craft compelling narratives. She often wrote about sports in her personal blog, showing a talent for blending statistics and stories with an accessible, passionate voice. Her work ethic was evident to colleagues and mentors who recognized her potential and supported her career goals. At home, she remained grounded. Her family supported her endeavors, proud of her achievements and motivated by her tenacity. Jessica's decision to adopt the pseudonym Jessica Redfield for her professional work was a personal choice, made to stand out in the media landscape. It became a name many would later associate with promise, potential, and tragedy. In the early years of her career, Jessica never lost sight of the balance between ambition and gratitude. She frequently expressed appreciation for those who helped her along the way and remained connected to her roots in Texas. Her character, bright, outspoken, and empathetic, made her a memorable presence in every space she entered. By her mid-20s, Jessica was ready for the next step. With growing experience and confidence, she set her sights on larger markets, more opportunities, and the chance to tell even bigger stories in the world of sports journalism. Jessica Gawi made the pivotal decision to relocate from San Antonio to Denver in 2011. The move was driven by her desire to advance in the competitive field of sports journalism. Denver, with its vibrant sports scene and active media environment, offered a promising arena for growth. The city housed several professional teams, including the Colorado Avalanche and Denver Nuggets, and provided opportunities to gain exposure in larger media markets. Jessica quickly immersed herself in the city's sports culture. She began interning at local sports radio stations, including 104.3 The Fan, where she contributed to broadcasts and developed her voice as a young reporter. Colleagues noted her enthusiasm, persistence, and a genuine love for the craft. Her presence in locker rooms and press boxes was marked by a balance of professionalism and passion. Her blog, written under the name Jessica Redfield, became a key outlet for her journalism. Focused mainly on hockey, her writing demonstrated not only a deep knowledge of the game, but also a personal connection to the sport. She analyzed plays, commented on trades, and interviewed players, presenting her insights in an approachable, thoughtful style. Readers appreciated her blend of technical understanding and emotional engagement. Jessica also contributed to several independent outlets and appeared on podcasts, gradually building a presence within the sports media community. Her aim was to break into major league coverage, and she pursued this goal with intensity. She attended games, wrote recaps, and volunteered for assignments, seeking every opportunity to sharpen her skills and gain recognition. Denver's fast-paced media landscape posed challenges, but Jessica approached each one with determination. She wasn't afraid to pitch stories, request interviews, or take on complex topics. Her background in radio gave her an edge in live commentary, while her written work continued to grow in confidence and clarity. She became a recognizable figure among other young journalists in Denver, forming friendships and networking with professionals across different outlets. Her social media presence also helped amplify her work. She shared her articles, responded to fans, and discussed games in real time. Her tweets and posts reflected a mix of professional insight and personal charm, making her an engaging figure in the local sports discourse. Despite the pressures of building a career, Jessica remained optimistic and grounded. She often reflected on her journey, noting how far she had come since her days as a student intern in Texas. Her goal was clear: to secure a position as a full-time sports reporter, ideally covering hockey at the national level. In Denver, she was closer to that dream than ever before. She embraced the city not just professionally, but personally. She explored its neighborhoods, built lasting friendships, and found a sense of belonging. For Jessica, Denver represented both a proving ground and a place of growth, a city where her aspirations could take shape. In early June 2012, Jessica Gawi traveled to Toronto for a short visit. The trip was intended to be a break from her intense work schedule in Denver. She planned to meet friends, explore the city, and enjoy its cultural offerings. One afternoon, she visited the Toronto Eaton Centre, a large downtown shopping mall. The center was busy with shoppers and diners, and Jessica entered the food court to grab a bite to eat. Moments after she left the area, gunfire erupted inside the mall. A gunman opened fire in the food court, killing 2 people and injuring several others. Jessica had exited just minutes before the shooting began. The realization that she had narrowly avoided harm left a profound impact on her. In the days that followed, she wrote a detailed blog post recounting the experience. In her post, Jessica described the surreal nature of being so close to an act of violence. She noted how the sound of gunshots, the confusion, and the swift response from authorities left a lasting impression. The experience made her reconsider how fleeting and unpredictable life could be. She wrote candidly about the randomness of survival and the discomfort of knowing others had not been as fortunate. Jessica's blog post did not dwell on fear. Instead, it conveyed gratitude and introspection. She reflected on the fragility of life and the importance of embracing every moment. The tone was measured and thoughtful, capturing a sense of vulnerability without dramatization. She acknowledged that while the event shook her, it also reinforced her desire to live with intention and purpose. The post gained modest attention among her friends and followers, many of whom expressed relief and support. Some shared their own stories of near misses and the ways such moments had reshaped their perspectives. Jessica continued to process the experience privately, but it subtly influenced her mindset in the weeks that followed. She returned to Denver with a renewed sense of focus. Though she didn't let the experience define her, she often referenced it when discussing personal growth and the value of human connection. Her work resumed at full pace, with new blog posts, game analyses, and radio contributions. She maintained her schedule, showing no outward signs of lingering distress. Yet, the memory of that day in Toronto remained. Jessica had come face to face with the randomness of violence, and her response had been to reflect and move forward with greater awareness. The experience, written in her own words, would later be seen in tragic contrast to what followed just over a month later. On the night of July 19, 2012, Jessica Gawi joined a group of friends to attend a midnight screening of The Dark Knight Rises at the Century 16 movie theater in Aurora, Colorado. Among those accompanying her was Brent Lowak, a friend visiting from Texas. The movie premiere was a highly anticipated event, drawing a large crowd. Jessica and her friends arrived early to secure seats in Theater 9. As the film began shortly after midnight, the audience settled in. Around 30 minutes into the screening, during a scene transition, a man exited through a side door, leaving it propped open. Moments later, he returned wearing tactical gear and carrying multiple firearms. At approximately 12:38 a.m., the attacker threw 2 gas canisters into the crowd and opened fire. Panic erupted in the theater. Confused at first by the sound and smoke, many believed it was part of the film. But the rapid succession of gunshots and screams quickly made the reality clear. People ducked, crawled, and ran for exits, while others tried to shield loved ones from harm. Chaos engulfed the room. Jessica was struck by gunfire during the initial minutes of the attack. Brent Lowak, sitting nearby, was also injured while trying to help her. He later recounted the horror of the moment, being unable to lift her and witnessing the unfolding tragedy around them. Despite his own injuries, Brent made multiple attempts to aid Jessica and others nearby. The attacker continued firing across the theater before moving toward the exit, where he was arrested without resistance in the parking lot. 12 people were killed and over 70 others were injured in the attack. Jessica was among the deceased. Her death was confirmed later that morning. News of the shooting quickly spread across the country. As names of the victims emerged, Jessica's became one of the first identified. Her family in Texas received the news from Brent and later through official channels. Her brother, Jordan Gawi, began posting updates online, providing a clear and composed voice amidst the shock. Jessica's previous blog post about the Toronto shooting resurfaced almost immediately. Readers were struck by the haunting timing, how she had narrowly escaped one act of violence, only to become a victim in another weeks later. The post was shared widely, and Jessica's words gained new meaning in the context of the tragedy. Friends and colleagues in Denver's media and sports communities reacted with disbelief and sorrow. Tributes poured in from newsrooms, sports teams, and fans who had followed her work. She was remembered as bright, determined, and full of promise. The attack itself prompted immediate questions about security, emergency response, and the mental state of the suspect. But for those who knew Jessica, the focus remained on the loss of a friend, daughter, and journalist whose life was just beginning to take flight. In the immediate hours following the Aurora Theater shooting, families of the victims gathered at a nearby high school, awaiting updates. Among them was Jessica Gawi's family, who received confirmation of her death early on July the 20th, 2012. Her brother, Jordan Gawi, quickly became a public voice for the family, sharing accurate information to counter speculation and offering respectful updates to those following the unfolding tragedy. Jessica's passing struck a deeply emotional chord across the journalism and sports communities. In Denver, stations where she had interned broadcast tributes, sharing stories of her enthusiasm and work ethic. Her former colleagues at 104.3. The Fan remembered her vibrant presence in the newsroom and her commitment to breaking into the male-dominated world of sports reporting. In San Antonio, local media honored her Texas roots and her aspirations to bring stories from the rink to the airwaves. The broader public became aware of Jessica through her blog post, recounting the Toronto Eaton Center shooting. Titled Late Night Thoughts on the Eaton Center Shooting, the post described her narrow escape from that earlier act of violence. After the Aurora tragedy, the blog circulated widely, quoted in national and international outlets. The poignant final paragraph, in which she expressed gratitude for life and questioned why she had been spared, became emblematic of the randomness and cruelty of mass violence. Social media also became a space for remembrance. Friends, fans, and strangers shared memories, condolences, and messages of grief using the hashtag #RIPJessica. Journalists across the country posted tributes, with many acknowledging her dreams and the tragedy of her life being cut short. Her Twitter timeline, filled with posts about hockey, radio, and humor, stood as a testament to her personality and professionalism. Among those most deeply affected was Brent Lowack, who had been shot while trying to help her. From his hospital bed, he described Jessica as brave, kind, and focused, even in those final moments. His recounting provided additional insight into the chaos of the theater and the closeness of their friendship. Public officials also acknowledged Jessica. Colorado's governor and several national figures expressed condolences to all victims' families. Statements included recognition of Jessica's journey as a rising sports journalist, and the tragic irony of her having recently survived another mass shooting. Jessica's family released a formal statement thanking supporters and urging the media to focus on her life rather than the attacker. They emphasized her passion for journalism, her love of hockey, and her determination to achieve her goals. Jordan Gowie, in particular, used his platform to speak against sensationalism and to protect the dignity of his sister's memory. In the days that followed, memorial services were held in both Colorado and Texas. Friends and former colleagues attended to share stories and celebrate her life. The ceremonies were marked by the reading of her blog, reflections from mentors, and a shared hope that her legacy would endure beyond the tragedy. Jessica Redfield. Gowie's name became one of the most recognized among the 12 who died that night. Not because of notoriety, but because her voice, through her writing, her reporting, and her presence, had already begun to reach people before her life was taken. Following the death of Jessica Giwi, her mother, Sandy Phillips, transformed her grief into activism. In the months after the Aurora shooting, Sandy and her husband, Lonnie Phillips, began to speak publicly about gun violence and its effects on families. They appeared at memorials, press conferences, and advocacy events, calling for reforms in gun legislation and improved mental health systems. Their focus was not on political posturing, but on preventing other families from suffering similar loss. Sandy and Lonnie traveled across the United States, meeting other survivors and victims' families from various mass shootings. They shared Jessica's story, not only to honor her memory, but to humanize the toll of gun violence. Their advocacy was deeply personal. They carried photos of Jessica and wore bracelets engraved with her name. Sandy often read excerpts from Jessica's blog to audiences, using her daughter's own words to emphasize the value of every life lost. The Phillipses became affiliated with organizations such as Everytown for Gun Safety and the Brady Campaign. They participated in town halls, testified before lawmakers, and joined campaigns aimed at improving background checks and reducing access to military-style firearms. Their activism was sustained and direct, shaped by the belief that change was both necessary and possible. In addition to advocacy, Jessica's legacy was also preserved through education. The Jessica Redfield Gowie Foundation was established to support aspiring female sports journalists. The foundation's mission was inspired by Jessica's own struggle to gain visibility in a competitive industry. The scholarship provided financial assistance and mentorship to young women pursuing careers in sports media. The scholarship initiative was supported by donations from individuals, corporations, and sports organizations. Several NHL teams and journalists helped amplify the cause, recognizing Jessica's passion for hockey and her efforts to build a career in the field. Each year, recipients of the scholarship were chosen based on merit, need, and their commitment to the values Jessica embodied: integrity, determination, and enthusiasm. Sandy and Lonnie were closely involved in the selection process, often engaging directly with the scholarship winners. They viewed the foundation not just as a tribute, but as a way to continue Jessica's work by empowering others who shared her dream. In interviews, Sandy often spoke about the healing power of helping others and how channeling grief into purpose allowed her to endure. Jessica's name continued to appear in discussions about mass shootings and the human impact of gun violence. Her story was cited in articles, documentaries, and public forums. The juxtaposition of her near miss in Toronto and her death in Aurora made her case especially poignant. Advocates and commentators referenced her writing as a symbol of both hope and heartbreak. The Phillipses extended their efforts beyond public policy. They formed a nonprofit focused on supporting survivors and families of mass shootings. The organization provided counseling referrals, legal resources, and emotional support. It also created a network through which survivors could connect, share experiences, and offer mutual aid. Sandy and Lonnie traveled extensively to visit impacted communities, always beginning with a moment of silence for the lives lost. Through their work, Jessica's name became associated with change, courage, and community. The young journalist who once fought for a voice in the press box was now remembered in classrooms, legislation debates, and foundations helping others rise. Her legacy was not defined by her final moments, but by the countless lives she touched and inspired after. In the aftermath of the Aurora Theater shooting, the perpetrator, James Holmes, was arrested outside the Century 16 Theater without incident. Authorities quickly identified him and began gathering evidence, including weapons, tactical gear, and a booby-trapped apartment rigged with explosives. Investigators worked around the clock to understand his motives, psychological profile, and the planning behind the attack. Holmes was charged with 166 counts, including first-degree murder and attempted murder. The legal process was complex and extended over several years. His defense team acknowledged that he was the shooter, but argued that he was mentally ill and not legally sane at the time of the crime. Prosecutors, however, pursued the death penalty, citing the calculated nature of the attack and the magnitude of loss inflicted. The trial began in April 2015 and lasted for several months. Survivors and families of victims, including the Gawis, attended proceedings regularly. Emotional testimony from those who had survived the shooting painted a harrowing picture of the night's events. Medical experts, first responders, and mental health professionals were called to testify. Holmes remained largely expressionless throughout. Jessica Gawi's family was present for key parts of the trial. Jordan Gawi delivered a victim impact statement that spoke to the life his sister had built and the future she had lost. He described Jessica's passion for sports journalism, her kindness, and the enduring pain of losing her. Other victims' families echoed similar sentiments, emphasizing the deep, irreversible harm caused by the defendant's actions. In July 2015, the jury found Holmes guilty on all counts. However, during the sentencing phase, the jury was unable to reach a unanimous decision on the death penalty. As a result, he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Reactions to the verdict were mixed. Some felt that justice had been served, while others expressed disappointment that the sentence did not include capital punishment. Sandy and Lonnie Phillips voiced their respect for the jury's decision, but also reiterated their broader concerns. They emphasized the need for systemic change that could prevent such tragedies in the future. Their focus remained on policy reform and support for victims, rather than prolonged engagement with the attacker's legal outcome. The trial also reignited national debates on gun laws, mental health services, and courtroom media coverage. Colorado's legal system faced scrutiny and praise for how it handled the high-profile case. The public observed the proceedings with intense interest, and news outlets across the country provided detailed reporting on every phase of the trial. Jessica's name came up repeatedly during the trial, not just as a victim, but as a symbol of unrealized potential. Her writings, career ambitions, and the tragic symmetry of surviving one shooting, only to fall in another, were mentioned in closing arguments and media retrospectives. Her story remained central to how the tragedy was remembered and discussed. With the trial concluded, many families, including the Gawis, turned their energy toward healing and rebuilding. Legal closure, while important, did not diminish the enduring grief. The Phillipses continued their advocacy, choosing not to dwell on the name of the gunman, but instead on the lives taken and the ongoing struggle to prevent similar acts. For the legal record, the Aurora Theater shooting was resolved with a lifetime incarceration. For those left behind, however, the sentence marked just one step in a much longer journey, one defined not only by loss, but by the relentless pursuit of meaning, justice, and remembrance. In the years following the Aurora Theater shooting, annual remembrances were held to honor the 12 victims, including Jessica Gyawi. On each anniversary, gatherings took place at memorial sites in Aurora and across the country. Families, friends, and members of the community assembled to reflect, share memories, and stand in solidarity. Jessica's name was often spoken during these ceremonies, a reminder of the young journalist whose life had symbolized both resilience and tragic loss. A permanent memorial was established near the Aurora Municipal Center, featuring 12 illuminated pillars, one for each person killed. Jessica's pillar, like the others, bore her name and age, 24. The site became a space for quiet reflection and public mourning. Visitors left flowers, photos, and messages throughout the year. The city supported the upkeep of the memorial and promoted events to honor victims respectfully and consistently. In the media and journalism communities, Jessica's story continued to resonate. Journalism schools referenced her life as a case study in ethics, vulnerability, and determination. The Jessica Redfield Gaywe Scholarship became a platform for new voices in sports media. Scholarship recipients often cited Jessica's legacy as an inspiration for their own work. Several of them went on to pursue successful careers, keeping her influence alive through their reporting. Jessica's parents remained active in commemorating her life. In addition to advocacy, they participated in community-building initiatives and mentoring programs. Sandy and Lonnie Phillips collaborated with educators and policymakers, using Jessica's experience to raise awareness about mass shootings, media responsibility, and the need for trauma-informed support systems. Her name also appeared in wider debates on journalism safety. As threats against reporters grew in subsequent years, some cited Jessica's case as a reminder that journalists, even those covering non-political topics, are not immune to violence. Her story became part of a broader conversation about the physical and emotional risks faced by those in media roles. Media outlets continued to cover Jessica's legacy during milestone anniversaries. On the 5th and 10th anniversaries of the Aurora shooting, major publications ran retrospectives that included interviews with her family, friends, and former colleagues. These pieces highlighted her passion for sports, her close relationships, and the unfinished stories she had hoped to tell. Educational institutions in both Texas and Colorado honored Jessica through lectures, essay contests, and commemorative plaques. In San Antonio, where she was born, local journalism programs established panels discussing her impact. In Denver, students at the Metropolitan State University of Denver, where she had networked with peers, participated in remembrance events focused on media and civic engagement. Each July, those who knew Jessica personally shared her favorite memories online. Her laughter, her opinions on hockey, her dream of working in the NHL press box. Her social media posts, frozen in time, were revisited with sadness and affection. They offered a digital snapshot of a life full of purpose, reminding readers that victims are more than statistics. They are voices, stories, and lives once in motion. Jessica's influence reached beyond journalism. Her story contributed to reforms in emergency response protocols at theaters and large venues. It also informed discussions on threat assessment, crowd safety, and the role of community resilience in recovery from mass violence. Even as new tragedies emerge in the national consciousness, Jessica's name continued to appear in lists, documentaries, and campaigns advocating for safer communities. Her legacy, sustained by those who loved her and those who learned from her, remained a beacon for what journalism, compassion, and hope can look like, even in the darkest of times. Heather Bogle's life centered around a quiet rhythm: work, family, and devotion to her young daughter. Living in Clyde, Ohio, Heather was known for her dedication, both as a single mother and as a hard-working employee at the local Whirlpool plant. Each evening, she'd leave for her night shift, clocking in at 10:30 p.m. and working through to the early morning. Friends and family described her as dependable, protective, and proud of her role as a mother. Her daughter, Mackenzie, was the light of her life, and Heather shaped her days around providing stability and care for the child she loved most. On the morning of April 9th, 2015, Heather completed her shift like any other. She clocked out at 6:17 a.m., left the Whirlpool facility, and was captured on surveillance walking to her dark-colored 2005 Oldsmobile. But from that point on, she vanished. She never picked up Mackenzie from the babysitter, and she didn't return any calls. By that afternoon, concern began to rise among her family. It was unlike Heather to be out of touch, especially where her daughter was concerned. Her sister-in-law, who had expected her for a hair appointment, was the first to voice alarm. Repeated messages went unanswered. As the hours passed, that concern deepened into fear. Heather's brother reported her missing later that day. A small community like Clyde wasn't used to disappearances. People began asking questions. Her family canvassed the area, checking places she might have gone, calling friends and co-workers, but no one had heard from her. Heather had simply disappeared. The police initiated a missing person investigation. Officers from the Sandusky County Sheriff's Office began reviewing her work records and the footage from the Whirlpool plant. There, Heather was seen leaving the building, but what happened next remained a mystery. She was not seen again on public cameras. Her phone had gone silent. No credit card activity, no calls, no social media updates. The next day, April 10th, 2015, Heather's car was discovered in an apartment complex parking lot on Somerton Street in Clyde, less than 2 miles from the plant. It had been parked in a corner of the lot, inconspicuous, as though it had been abandoned. Officers responded to the scene, and what they found shifted the case from a missing person to something far more grim. Heather Bogle, mother, friend, worker, had vanished under circumstances that made no sense to anyone who knew her. She had no enemies, no history of drug use, and no reason to disappear voluntarily. Her disappearance left a gaping hole in her family's life, and the unease in the community began to grow. Something terrible had happened. The question was what and why. As word of Heather Bogle's disappearance spread, the mood in Clyde shifted from concern to fear. With the discovery of her Oldsmobile Alero in the Somerton Street apartment complex parking lot, the missing person case took a darker turn. Officers who responded noted the car was locked and showed no visible signs of struggle from the outside. But the placement of the vehicle, off to the side in a lot where Heather had no known connections, raised immediate suspicion. Investigators obtained a warrant to search the vehicle. Inside the trunk, under a layer of disarray, they made a horrifying discovery. The body of Heather Bogle, stuffed inside, with visible signs of brutal violence. She was fully clothed, but her fingernails were broken, and her arms were covered in bruises. Her hair had been crudely cut short, and duct tape was wrapped around her wrists. The autopsy would later reveal she had been shot twice in the back, beaten, and possibly tortured. She had defensive wounds, suggesting she fought back hard. The trunk of her car became the initial crime scene, but it was clear her murder had taken place elsewhere. Forensic investigators scoured the vehicle for clues. Bloodstains were found on the trunk lining. There were no fingerprints linking anyone new to the scene, but scrapings from beneath Heather's fingernails were collected. Crucial evidence that would later play a pivotal role in the case. Meanwhile, Heather's family faced the devastating confirmation of their worst fears. Her sister-in-law and brother, who had led much of the effort to locate her, were now grieving. The police delivered the news in person, and word quickly reached the rest of the community. What had started as a missing persons case had become a murder investigation, and the urgency to find whoever was responsible escalated. Authorities interviewed friends, co-workers, and known acquaintances. No clear suspects emerged. Heather had been careful about her relationships. She had recently started a new relationship with a woman, Kayona Bohr, and had been open about her sexuality. Some investigators began to focus on whether that change in her personal life had caused conflict. In parallel, police searched for surveillance footage from nearby businesses and homes. They wanted to piece together her final movements after she left work. Unfortunately, the apartment complex where the car was found had no functioning cameras. Tips from residents turned up little. No one had reported seeing who parked the car. As part of standard protocol, police reviewed Heather's digital records. Her cell phone had gone dark shortly after she left work. Investigators hoped her call logs, text messages, or social media activity might provide leads, but they found no communications after the morning of April 9th. The question now was, who would want Heather dead? She had no criminal history, no active disputes, and was widely liked. The violence of her death pointed to deep anger, or intent to silence. For the first few days, the case stalled. There was too little evidence, too many possible avenues, and no witnesses. But the pressure to solve the murder quickly mounted. The eyes of an entire community, and soon, a larger public, were watching. The autopsy conducted on Heather Bogle revealed a chilling picture of calculated brutality. Heather had been shot twice in the back, wounds inflicted at close range. The trajectory suggested she may have been kneeling or turned away from her killer. Bruising on her torso and limbs indicated she was beaten prior to death. Duct tape residue on her wrists and clothing confirmed she had been restrained. Her hair had been crudely chopped, likely after death, and she had bruises consistent with blunt force trauma. The violence was intimate, personal, and cold. There were no signs of sexual assault, but the condition of her body pointed to an attempt to degrade or dehumanize her. The short haircut, abrasions, and tight binding with duct tape suggested a desire to control or humiliate. Medical examiners estimated she had been killed within hours of leaving work. The scene in which she was discovered, the trunk of her own car, was not the place where she died. This was a dump site, not the scene of the murder. Her clothing, black slacks, a black shirt, and a Whirlpool ID badge remained intact. But investigators noted how unusually clean they were, considering the injuries. This raised suspicions that she may have been redressed post-mortem, another unsettling detail suggesting the killer had taken time and effort after the act. Meanwhile, forensic teams scoured the Oldsmobile for any trace of the killer. Blood was found in the trunk, but not elsewhere in the car, reinforcing the belief Heather had been killed elsewhere and her body transported later. Lint rollers were used on the interior to collect stray fibers or hairs. DNA samples were lifted from beneath her fingernails, a standard practice when a victim is believed to have fought back. Those samples would eventually lead to a break, but not immediately. Investigators also analyzed tire tracks and any footprints near the parked car. They interviewed residents in the Somerton complex, hoping someone had seen something, but no solid leads emerged. It was possible the car had been moved during the early morning hours when few people were awake. Law enforcement expanded the scope of their inquiry. If the killing had occurred elsewhere, they needed to find that location. They canvassed the area for abandoned properties, storage units, garages, anywhere a murder could have taken place unnoticed. But Clyde was a small town. There were limited places to hide something so horrific. The sheriff's department faced pressure from local media and residents. A young mother had been tortured and killed, her body left in her own car. The community wanted answers, and quickly. Heather's family, still reeling from the confirmation of her death, pleaded for the public to come forward with information. Amidst the investigation, attention turned to people in Heather's circle. Her girlfriend, Keona Bohr, and others who had seen her in recent weeks were brought in for questioning. Detectives asked about her relationships, whether she had expressed fear, or if there had been recent arguments. Yet, nothing definitive emerged. No one close to her seemed to have motive or opportunity. The killer had left no obvious fingerprint, only questions. As days passed with no arrest, theories began circulating. Had it been a random act, or someone with a grudge? The only certainty was that Heather Bogle's murder was neither impulsive nor accidental. It had been deliberate, methodical, and executed with disturbing precision. With public pressure mounting and a killer at large, Detective Sean O'Connell of the Sandusky County Sheriff's Office took the lead on Heather Bogle's murder investigation. O'Connell, a veteran in the department, immediately began constructing a narrative based on the people Heather had most recently interacted with. Central to his early theory were three individuals: Keona Bohr, Heather's girlfriend; Omar Satchel, Keona's ex-boyfriend; and Kayrie Jeffrey, a mutual acquaintance. All three lived in or near the Somerton Street complex where Heather's car had been discovered. O'Connell suspected that jealousy or personal conflict may have driven the crime. He focused on Bohr and Satchel, questioning their relationship and probing for tensions. Bohr, who had last seen Heather the night before the murder, told police they had not argued and that she had no reason to harm her. Satchel and Jeffrey also denied involvement. Despite their cooperation, the three quickly became persons of interest in the eyes of O'Connell. O'Connell brought in cadaver dogs to search their properties. He claimed the dogs alerted to the scent of decomposition in a laundry basket and on a vehicle used by one of the suspects. Although such evidence is not definitive in court, it bolstered his theory. He also sought surveillance footage from around the apartment complex and other nearby locations, hoping to tie the suspects to the scene. However, the video evidence was inconclusive. No clear images placed any of the three individuals near Heather's car around the time it was believed to have been abandoned. Additionally, cell phone records and location data did not support their involvement. Still, O'Connell proceeded, conducting searches, interrogations, and collecting DNA samples. Despite inconsistencies, he doubled down. He held press briefings where he named the trio as prime suspects, raising public suspicion. Some in the department questioned the strength of the case, especially when lab results returned. DNA from Heather's fingernail scrapings did not match any of the three. Rather than considering alternate suspects, O'Connell allegedly dismissed the results as contamination or irrelevant. Convinced his original theory was correct. This approach concerned Heather's family, who wanted justice but also clarity. They asked for updates, but the investigation began to feel stalled. Months passed, and no charges were filed. The case lingered in limbo, hampered by what now appeared to be tunnel vision. Though O'Connell had pursued aggressive tactics, the evidence did not support his chosen suspects. In the meantime, Heather's loved ones tried to preserve her memory. They organized vigils and fundraisers, calling for answers. Community members wondered why the case had not advanced. Tensions simmered, particularly as the publicly named suspects insisted on their innocence and criticized the investigation's direction. Internally, concern grew over O'Connell's handling of the case. His dismissal of DNA evidence and targeting of suspects without corroboration raised questions. The sheriff's office, however, did not immediately intervene. It would take another change in leadership to shift the course of the investigation. For now, the file remained open, the killer unidentified, and the truth buried beneath missteps and assumptions. What should have been a search for facts had become a chase for confirmation. And in the process, key evidence sat idle, waiting for someone to look at it without bias. As 2015 drew to a close, the Heather Bogle investigation was at a standstill. Despite early efforts, Detective Sean O'Connell's case against the three initial suspects, Kiona Bohr, Omar Satchel, and Kayrie Jeffrey, had produced no arrests. Public trust in the investigation began to erode. Community members questioned how a high-profile murder with multiple leads could stall so completely. But beneath the surface, concerns extended beyond a lack of progress. They pointed to how the investigation itself had been mishandled. One of the most glaring issues involved DNA evidence. Forensic analysis had found genetic material beneath Heather's fingernails. This was widely considered vital in homicide cases, often revealing the identity of an attacker. When the results returned from the lab, they showed that the DNA did not match any of the three individuals O'Connell had publicly identified as suspects. Instead of reassessing his theory, O'Connell dismissed the results, alleging that the samples were degraded or that lab procedures were flawed. This refusal to pivot became a turning point. His fixation on a single theory led to other investigative errors. He continued to build a narrative unsupported by physical evidence. In interviews, O'Connell suggested that the crime was connected to drug use, despite no proof of substance abuse in Heather's toxicology report or history. He insinuated links to criminal behavior among his suspects, none of which held up under scrutiny. Critics accused him of relying on innuendo rather than evidence. Adding to the controversy, O'Connell reportedly ignored or discouraged follow-up on alternative leads. Several tips that might have directed attention to other persons of interest were not thoroughly investigated. Officers within the department began raising concerns internally. Some suggested that key documents were altered or mishandled. There were whispers that exculpatory evidence had been omitted from reports, an allegation that would eventually form the basis of formal charges. Frustration grew among Heather's family. They had initially trusted that justice was being pursued, but their confidence wavered. Each month that passed without progress added to their grief. They began to question the investigative strategy and voice their dissatisfaction publicly. Heather's brother, Adam Bogle in particular, was vocal about the need for a thorough, unbiased examination of the facts. He pleaded for state officials to step in. In 2016, O'Connell retired. The investigation remained unsolved, with the case file resting in limbo. But the damage done was significant. The public naming of suspects who were never charged had left reputations tarnished and lives upended. Kiona Bohr, Omar Satchel, and Kayrie Jeffrey each faced public suspicion, scrutiny, and even threats, all without a single piece of conclusive evidence linking them to Heather's murder. It wasn't just a matter of a stalled investigation. It was a matter of justice delayed and distorted. The credibility of the Sandusky County Sheriff's Office suffered. The integrity of law enforcement was now a subject of local debate. Heather's family still wanted answers, but now they also wanted accountability. Who killed Heather Bogle? And who would finally investigate the case without prejudice? Those questions would remain unanswered until a new sheriff took office and re-examined the evidence with a different lens, one that would finally break the case open. In 2017, a significant shift occurred in the Heather Bogle investigation with the election of Chris Hilton as Sandusky County Sheriff. With a platform emphasizing reform and accountability, Hilton inherited a department struggling with public trust. Among the first matters he addressed was the stagnant Bogle case. It had remained unresolved for over 2 years, and the community was still waiting for justice. Hilton pledged to re-examine every piece of evidence, leaving no assumption unchallenged. One of his first moves was to reassign the case to a new investigative team. This team reviewed prior reports and concluded that the original investigation had veered off course. Key leads had been ignored. DNA evidence had been sidelined. And crucially, the tunnel vision that had characterized the case under O'Connell's leadership had stifled progress. Hilton's mandate was clear: go back to the beginning. The team started by revisiting the forensic results. The DNA found under Heather's fingernails, previously dismissed, was prioritized. Investigators submitted the profile for comparison against state and national databases. Simultaneously, they re-examined her digital footprint. Phone logs, text messages, GPS data, and social media interactions from the days leading up to her murder. Through Heather's cell phone records, investigators noticed a series of texts exchanged shortly before her death, with someone not initially in focus: Daniel Myers, a co-worker at the Whirlpool plant. Myers had never been seriously questioned during the original investigation. At the time, he told officers he had no personal relationship with Heather. That now stood out. Investigators conducted background checks and discovered troubling details about Myers. He had a history of domestic violence allegations. One former partner had filed reports describing threats and controlling behavior. Though those cases had not resulted in charges, they cast a shadow. Most significantly, Myers had previously dated women who later reported similar fears to Heather's: sudden disappearances, communication blackouts, and stalking. Digging deeper, the new team cross-referenced the date of Heather's disappearance with GPS data pulled from her phone and work-issued badge activity. They learned that her last known digital location did not align with where her body was found. Instead, it placed her near the vicinity of Myers's trailer home in rural Clyde on the morning she vanished. The location data, once overlooked, now became the investigation's linchpin. Detectives brought Myers in for questioning. When asked again about his interactions with Heather, he reiterated that they were merely co-workers and denied any personal contact. Investigators, now armed with contradictory digital evidence, grew more suspicious. They obtained a search warrant for his residence and property. The search revealed more troubling clues. Myers had recently replaced sections of the floor in his trailer. Dogs trained to detect the scent of human decomposition alerted in specific spots. Though not definitive proof, it deepened investigators' belief that this was a primary crime scene. Samples were collected for lab analysis. The evidence gathered over weeks began to align. Inconsistent statements, physical alterations to Myers's home, and the unexplained connection to Heather's final movements. What had once been missed due to investigative bias now stood in stark relief. It was no longer a question of whether Heather's killer could be identified. It was a matter of building a case that would hold up in court. The renewed focus on Daniel Myers turned the tide of the investigation, with GPS data placing Heather Bogle near his trailer on the morning of her disappearance. Investigators intensified their scrutiny. The cell tower pings from her phone corroborated movement toward a rural area south of Clyde, precisely where Myers lived. Heather's phone went dark shortly afterward, around 7 a.m., further suggesting something had happened at or near that location. Detectives revisited Heather's digital footprint, searching for any overlooked connections. Text messages recovered from her phone showed she had communicated with Myers days before her death. Some messages were friendly, others vague, but they suggested a familiarity contradicting his earlier claims of casual acquaintance. Investigators suspected he had attempted to delete evidence of their relationship. Forensic techs recovered partial message threads and timestamps that had been manually erased, an action that raised serious concern. The search of Myers' trailer revealed alterations that matched a pattern often seen in efforts to conceal a crime. New floorboards had been installed in one section of the trailer. Myers claimed it was a simple renovation, but trained cadaver dogs brought to the scene reacted strongly in areas now covered by the new flooring. Investigators removed portions of the floor and sent samples to the lab. The results would later confirm the presence of Heather's blood deep within the subflooring. Alongside physical evidence, investigators also examined Myers' electronic devices. His phone and computer history showed searches that included how to remove blood stains, clean DNA from surfaces, and delete text messages permanently. These searches had been made within a narrow time frame, just hours after Heather was last seen alive. As the investigation progressed, the portrait of Daniel Myers grew darker. He had a prior incident where he allegedly forced a former partner to remain in his trailer against her will. Though no charges were filed at the time, the woman's account bore chilling similarities to what investigators believed happened to Heather. Her story described threats, physical violence, and a terrifying sense of control. Other women described Myers as charming at first, then manipulative and volatile. The most compelling development came when the lab returned results from the DNA collected beneath Heather's fingernails. The profile matched Daniel Myers. This was not a partial or contaminated match. It was definitive. It indicated close physical contact during her final moments. The evidence suggested a struggle, further confirmed by bruising and defensive wounds on Heather's arms and hands. Authorities now had physical, digital, and testimonial evidence tying Myers to the crime. Surveillance from a gas station near his trailer showed his vehicle driving in the direction of Clyde early on April 10th, the same day Heather's car was found. It was likely he had driven the Oldsmobile there and parked it to divert suspicion. Presented with the mounting case, Myers remained silent. When confronted with the DNA match, he offered no explanation. He declined further interviews. Prosecutors prepared to file charges, confident in the cumulative weight of evidence. After years of delay and misdirection, the investigation was back on track, pointed squarely at one individual who had eluded attention for far too long. On February 8, 2019, Daniel Myers was arrested and charged with the murder of Heather Bogle. The case against him, rebuilt meticulously by Sheriff Chris Hilton's team, was strong. DNA under Heather's fingernails matched Myers. Her blood was found beneath his trailer's replaced floorboards. Cell phone data placed her at his residence the morning she disappeared. His previous denials had unraveled entirely under the weight of digital and forensic evidence. In preparation for trial, prosecutors outlined the sequence of events as they believed they had occurred. After Heather clocked out of her shift at Whirlpool on April 9, 2015, Myers had lured her to his trailer, either under the pretense of helping with something or through a personal invitation. Once there, the situation turned violent. Investigators believe she was restrained, beaten, and shot twice in the back. The autopsy confirmed close-range gunshot wounds, consistent with the layout of the crime scene. After the killing, Myers attempted to clean and alter the scene. He replaced sections of the floor, cleaned up visible blood, and disposed of materials. He dressed Heather's body, cut her hair, and bound her with duct tape, perhaps to confuse investigators or erase trace evidence. Then, in the early hours of April 10th, he drove her Oldsmobile to the Somerton Street apartments and abandoned it, leaving her body in the trunk. Surveillance footage from nearby captured his vehicle returning shortly after. Further background checks into Myers' past brought forward disturbing patterns. One woman came forward during the investigation, describing how Myers had held her at gunpoint in 2009 and threatened to kill her if she ever left him. Another claimed he sexually assaulted her while she was unconscious. Though neither case had resulted in prosecution at the time, both now painted a consistent picture of a man capable of manipulation and violence. As the trial approached, Myers faced mounting pressure. In August 2022, to avoid a potential death sentence, he agreed to a plea deal. He pled guilty to aggravated murder and received a life sentence without the possibility of parole. The deal spared Heather's family from enduring a lengthy and traumatic trial. Prosecutors acknowledged the depth of the family's loss and emphasized the strength of the evidence that would have been presented had the case gone to trial. At sentencing, Heather's brother and sister-in-law spoke about the hole left in their lives. Mackenzie, Heather's daughter, was being raised by family members, her future shaped by the absence of the mother who had loved her fiercely. They described Heather's kindness, her work ethic, and the anguish of losing her so brutally. Myers offered no apology. He remained silent, refusing to provide any explanation for his actions. Though justice had finally been served, questions remained about how long it took. Investigators later reviewed other unsolved deaths connected to Myers. In particular, the 2009 suicide of Heather's friend Nicole Fickler raised suspicion. Nicole had also been in a relationship with Myers. Her death had originally been ruled self-inflicted, but new scrutiny suggested otherwise. Though no new charges were filed, the possibility of Myers' involvement in other crimes loomed large. Daniel Myers now sits in prison, convicted for Heather Bogle's murder, but the trail of abuse he left behind stretches years before her death. The case stood as a sobering reminder of how easily justice can be delayed when assumptions outweigh facts, and how critical it is to follow the evidence wherever it leads. Daniel Myers' arrest marked a pivotal moment in the Heather Bogle case, but it was only the beginning of the legal reckoning. In the months following his February 2019 indictment, the prosecution prepared to present an overwhelming body of evidence. The DNA match under Heather's fingernails, blood traces in Myers' trailer, phone and GPS data, and testimony from past partners all painted a damning portrait. Prosecutors described the murder as calculated, brutal, and deeply personal. Myers was charged with aggravated murder, kidnapping, tampering with evidence, and abuse of a corpse. He initially pleaded not guilty. His defense attorneys attempted to suppress certain evidence, arguing procedural errors in the investigation, but the motion was denied. The court ruled that the searches and forensic collection had followed legal protocols. With the trial date approaching, Myers' legal team faced an uphill battle. In 2022, facing the reality of the evidence against him, Myers opted for a plea deal. He pleaded guilty to aggravated murder in exchange for the removal of the death penalty from consideration. On August 25th, 2022, he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. He showed no emotion as the judge handed down the sentence. There was no statement, no expression of remorse, no explanation for the killing. For Heather's family, the sentence brought a measure of justice but little comfort. They had waited more than 7 years for accountability. At the sentencing hearing, Heather's brother Adam described the emotional toll the murder had taken. Her daughter, Mackenzie, was now being raised by relatives, growing up without the mother who had once shaped her world. The family expressed gratitude for the eventual resolution, but also frustration that it had taken so long. Parallel to Myers's prosecution, a separate legal process unfolded involving former lead detective Sean O'Connell. His handling of the case in its early years had come under serious scrutiny. In 2018, O'Connell was indicted on multiple charges, including tampering with evidence, falsification, and dereliction of duty. Investigators found he had altered documents, ignored exculpatory DNA results, and aggressively pursued suspects based on faulty theories. In court, O'Connell faced the consequences of his misconduct. He pleaded no contest and was found guilty of evidence tampering and coercion. He received a 30-day jail sentence and a $2,500 fine, a punishment some criticized as too lenient given the harm his actions had caused. The charges underscored how systemic failures and personal bias had delayed justice for Heather Bogle. Meanwhile, the Sandusky County Sheriff's Office instituted reforms. New policies emphasized the integrity of forensic evidence, proper documentation, and avoiding premature conclusions. The department sought to rebuild community trust, tarnished by years of investigative failure. Sheriff Chris Hilton emphasized transparency and accountability, pledging that cases would be investigated with impartiality and diligence. The Heather Bogle case closed officially with Daniel Myers' conviction, but its impact reverberated through Ohio's law enforcement and legal communities. It stood as a stark lesson in how missteps, when unchecked, can obstruct the path to justice. It also showed how a determined reevaluation, guided by evidence, not assumption, can ultimately right a grievous wrong. Though Myers would spend the rest of his life behind bars for those left behind, the sentence could never undo the loss. But it did bring an end to years of uncertainty. The truth had finally been unearthed, piece by piece. Heather Bogle's murder, once mired in confusion and misdirection, ultimately became a case defined by both justice and accountability. With Daniel Myers sentenced to life in prison without parole, Heather's family could finally begin to process their grief with the knowledge that her killer was no longer free. Still, the emotional weight of the years spent in uncertainty, the damage caused by early missteps, and the trauma of the crime itself could not be undone. Her daughter Mackenzie continued to grow up without her mother, surrounded by extended family who ensured Heather's memory remained central in her life. At vigils and memorials, Heather was remembered as a devoted mother and a resilient woman who had worked hard to build a stable life. Her family's quiet strength, in the face of both tragedy and institutional failure, resonated deeply within the Clyde community. The investigation's early failures had not gone unpunished. Sean O'Connell's conviction in 2018 sent a message about the importance of investigative integrity. Evidence tampering, coercion, and the public naming of innocent individuals had not only stalled justice, they had undermined the very system meant to protect victims. O'Connell's 30-day jail sentence and fine may have seemed small, but the real impact was reputational. His career in law enforcement ended in disgrace, and the scandal prompted policy changes across several county departments. The Sandusky County Sheriff's Office underwent reforms aimed at preventing similar failures. Sheriff Chris Hilton's leadership had been instrumental in redirecting the case toward resolution. He emphasized evidence-based policing, transparency with the public, and accountability within the ranks. The reinvestigation of the Bogle case became a teaching model for future law enforcement training in the region. Beyond the courtroom, the case sparked broader discussions about domestic violence, investigative bias, and how digital evidence can shape modern homicide investigations. Myers' violent history, largely overlooked before, forced a reevaluation of how past allegations should inform risk assessments. His ability to remain under the radar for years, despite a pattern of abusive behavior, raised concerns about systemic blind spots in how threats are identified and tracked. Unsolved deaths connected to Myers, including that of Nicole Fickler in 2009, were quietly reviewed. Although no new charges emerged, the reevaluation of these cases was part of the renewed commitment to thoroughness. Law enforcement began cross-referencing DNA from older cases in which he might have been involved. The Heather Bogle case had shown what could happen when critical evidence is ignored, and what can be achieved when it is finally followed. In the years since Myers' sentencing, Heather's family has worked to keep her story alive, not through sensationalism, but through advocacy. They have supported efforts to improve investigative training and to provide resources for families of missing persons and homicide victims. Their message has remained consistent. Justice must be guided by facts, not assumptions. Heather Bogle's legacy now lives not just in the memory of those who loved her, but in the institutional changes her case helped inspire. Her story, once clouded by error, stands as a solemn reminder of how justice, delayed though it may be, is still worth the pursuit.